of June 2019. You are watching KBC Channel 1, and this morning we expect 4 bills, 3 of them being new bills that will be introduced in the House this morning, and 4 motions. The Crops Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 25 of the year 2019. This one is sponsored by Honorable Tandaza Kasim Sawa, Member of Parliament, Matuga constituency, and it is a bill that seeks to include the Akiot into the Crops Act of 2013. It is a crop known as Murangi in the coastal region, and this is because of its bright red color and fruit. It is largely grown at the coast, and this Member of Parliament in this particular bill argues that it is a crop that is underutilized, noting that the fruit is harvested for seeds which contain bixin. Bixin is a colorant. It is used in coloring cheese, fees, salad oil, margarine, and cosmetics like lipsticks. And he says this crop was first introduced in the coastal region in the 1970s. It is disease and pest free. It is also drought resistant. And so it is a crop that, if included in this particular act, could go a long way in adding to the economic potential of the coast region. The Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 33 of the year 2019, is the other bill that will be coming up for the first reading in the National Assembly this morning. It is sponsored by Turkana County Member of Parliament, Honorable Joyce Emanikor, and it is one that seeks to enhance disaster risk reduction in learning institution, and noting that the current school curriculum does not provide for learners to be educated on safety, particularly on how to conduct security drills, evacuation, first aid, how to locate explosive, how to sense danger, among other safety-related teachings. And the Honorable Emanikor will be hoping that if passed by this particular House and also enacted into law, then this particular piece of legislation will go a long way in ensuring the protection of students who are learning under the current curriculum. The Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill, National Assembly Bill number 34 of the year 2019, sponsored by Suba North Member of Parliament, Honorable Mili Odhiambo Mabona, and this one seeks to regulate rights and obligations related to assisted reproductive technology. And this is particularly so in order to benefit individuals or couples that have challenges conceiving due to factors associated with infertility. And so it seeks to streamline qualifications of health practitioners who administer assisted reproductive technology, those who work in this sector that is gaining traction every other day in the country. And this will rather facilitate or make it possible for beneficiaries to be protected by law. It touches, among other provisions, the rights touching on consent, and this is as far as handling of embryos resulted from assisted reproductive technology is concerned, welfare of children born out of assisted reproduction, and even going as far as spelling out duties of persons who undergo this particular procedure and their legal status as parents or guardians thereof. The third bill, or rather the fourth bill that is listed for debate this morning, the Law of Contract Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 1 of the year 2019, sponsored by Juja Member of Parliament, Honorable Francis Waititu, and it seeks to amend the Law of Contract Act, Cap 23, so that in case of a default by the principal borrower, then the creditor should first realize assets of the borrower before proceeding to realize the same assets from the guarantor. A live broadcast brought to you by the Parliamentary Broadcasting Unit in conjunction with the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. My name is Vereso Mwanga. On behalf of the entire crew, I welcome you to follow the proceedings this morning. It is a private member's sitting that is being led by the Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Moses Japoi. Good morning.
Wala wa haki wa wanadamu, twakusihi ututazame kwa neema nyingi sisi watumishi wako ambao umeridhika kutuita ili tutekeleze shughuli muhimu za jamhuri hii yetu. Twakuomba ututeremshie baraka zako sisi tuliokutanika hapa, na utujalie tuyatende na kufikiria mambo yote yatakayofikishwa mbele yetu kwa njia ya haki na uaminifu, ili utukufu na sifa zako ziendelezwe na ili kustawisha amani, ufanisi na heri ya nchi hii yetu na wale ambao haja zao umezikabidhi mikononi mwetu. Amen. Other honorable members, this cold morning we are quite short of the required quorum. Therefore, I order the bell to be rung.
If you are joining us, you are in time for live proceedings from the National Assembly this morning. It is Wednesday, 26th day of June 2019. Traditionally, the morning sitting reserved for private members' bills and motions. And as such, we have 5 motions and 4 bills lined up for debate this morning, all sponsored by members of Parliament. First, we shall have a question being put on a motion whose discussion has been dispensed with in the House. And this one is sponsored by South Mugirango Member of Parliament, Honorable Silvanus Osoro. It speaks to the development and implementation of a curriculum for training students and pupils in schools on road safety. It is anchored on the premise that an estimated 3,000 deaths are witnessed in the country as a result of road accidents, and therefore it is paramount that this particular education is factored in the curriculum. Members of the House leadership, Honorable Chris Omalwa there on your screen, just trying to mobilize members to come into the chambers. According to the standing orders, as approved by members of the National Assembly, a minimum 50 are required in order for business to be transacted in the House. And it will appear that this morning they are short of that number. However, we also do know that these same members of the National Assembly sit in various House committees that prosecute a number of issues. And so even though they're not in the chambers, they could be engaged in those particular committees, and they could also be probably out there on fact-finding missions as part of their legislation mandates in the House. Once we do attain those numbers as required, then business shall continue. And as I mentioned earlier, there are motions and bills lined up. There is a motion on measures that should be taken to bridge the trade deficit. And this one is sponsored by the Honorable Major Retired John Waluke, Member of Parliament, Sirisia constituency. And he is seeking that the government urgently puts in place measures to bridge the huge trade deficit, including providing incentives to potential investors and farmers, supporting local production through promotion and protection of local industries, and implementing a competitive export promotion strategy. It is a motion that speaks to all the 4 key pillars of the government's development agenda the provision of affordable housing, promoting the manufacturing sector, affordable healthcare, as well as ensuring food security. All those captured herein in this particular motion that members shall be looking into this morning. The other motion is by Starehe Member of Parliament, Honorable Charles Njagwa Kanyi, popularly known as Jaguar. It seeks to review the mandatory retirement age in the public service. And he's arguing that this one should be reviewed from the current 60 to 50 years. He wants it reviewed downwards. And he argues this will, among other things, create opportunities for the employment of the youth. He is basing his argument on the premise that there are over 800,000 graduates from universities, colleges, technical institutions, vocational centers, and other tertiary institutions that are released into the market, the job market annually. And so it is paramount that they are considered, or at least given that there is a deliberate move to ensure that they are rather absorbed in the public service, employed in the public service. The Member of Parliament Kirinyaga Central, Honorable John Munene Wambogo, also has a motion pending before the House. This one on policy measures to ensure 100% transition from secondary school to tertiary education, noting that currently the government has put in place measures to ensure that pupils who graduate from primary school have access to secondary school education, and he wants this taken further beyond secondary education to ensure that everyone has access to higher learning. And he says that according to the available data, a huge percentage of students who sit for the Kenya Certificate of Secondary Education do not transition to universities, are not in a position to pursue degree courses, and therefore it is important that they are factored into other institutions of vocational training, tertiary training centers, to ensure that they also benefit. And all this is anchored in Article 55 of the Constitution that requires the state to put in place those measures that will ensure the youth have access to relevant quality education. All that and much, much more coming your way this morning from the National Assembly, including questions from a number of members. You do remember that late last year, they reintroduced question time in the National Assembly. And so normally we have private questions and ordinary questions. And this morning there are ordinary questions listed. And these ones will be fronted to the relevant cabinet secretaries through the departmental committees of the National Assembly.
So therefore, business will begin.
And among those listed this morning is the Honorable Geoffrey
Order number 1, administration of oath. Order number 2, communication from the chair. Order number 3, messages. Order number 4, petitions.
Under this particular one, we have the member for Sabatia, Honorable Alfred Masadia Agoi.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to raise this petition. I, the undersigned, on behalf of the family of Mr. Thomas Anzeze Musila, a Kenyan citizen from Igonga Village, Chavakali location, Sabatia sub-county in Viga County. Draw the attention of the House to the following. 1, that land that land is an essential enabler of economic empowerment for the families through utilization of the various forms of economic potential of land. 2, that the late Mzee Hezekiah Musila Chelanga was the owner of land parcel number LR, number Kakamega, Vialo, 1, measuring approximately 2.8 acres. 3, that on 19th March 1998, Mzee Hezekiah Musila Chelanga transferred ownership of the said land to his son, Mr. Thomas Anzeze Musila, as inheritance. 4, that Mr. Thomas Anzeze averts that in 1996, his late father lost the original title deed for the said parcel of land and reported the case to Kitale Police Station, captured under OB number 43/26/8/96 as required by law. 5, that to legalize the said land transfer to his son, Mr. Thomas Anzeze, the late Mr. Hezekiah saw an affidavit before the then Principal Magistrate of Kenya Court on 23rd August 1996, since he couldn't raise the 2,000 shillings procedure fee required to obtain a copy of lost title deed. 6, that the import of the affidavit was meant to declare the lost title deed null and void for purposes of any transactions relating to the said parcel of land, in case the title deed was surfaced anywhere at any given time from the time and the date of the swearing in of the affidavit. 7, that on 30th August 2005, the petitioner visited the Kakamega Land Office and requested for a search of the title deed number Kakamega/Vialo/1, which was supposed to be his land and which was his land, and was startled to find out that the ownership had been transferred to his brother, Samson Musila, under the voided title deed, contrary to the terms of the affidavit shown in by his late father. 8, further that other irregular subdivisions had already been effected on the said parcel of land under parcel numbers N Maragoli/Vialo/1661, N Maragoli/Vialo/1662, and N Maragoli/Vialo/1663, and awarded to Mr. Ephraim Andefa Ngereso, Japheth Onzere-Garo, and Beatrice Knight Opio, respectively, without the knowledge of the bona fide owner. 9, that on the 20th January 2015, Thomas Anzeze was served with a court order, E&L case number 8 of 2015, where the complainant, Pasilo Sibiru Lubeka, had sued him for having refused to vacate her land. 10, that void a court judgment made on 26 January 2015 in favor of Pasilo Sibiru, Mr. Thomas Anzeze was evicted from the land on 6 July 2018 by a gang of young men who demolished all his houses and the structures, therefore rendering him homeless. Honorable Speaker, the said petitioner is my neighbor, and the contents of this petition are well within my knowledge because I was witnessing this case as it was happening. 11, that efforts to resolve the matter with the relevant agencies have been fertile. And that 12, the matter in respect of which this petition is raised is not pending in any court of law, constitutional, or a legal body. Therefore, your humble petitioners pray that the National Assembly, through the Department Committee on Lands, 1, inquire into all the matters raised in this petition, pursuant to Standing Order number 216/5, 2, request the Cabinet Secretary for Lands to provide information on the manner in which land belonging to the petitioner was illegally transferred to other persons, and 3, makes any other recommendations that it deems fit in the circumstances of this matter. Honorable Speaker, I beg your indulgence to request that this matter is handled within 60 days because the petitioner is being thrown out, he's living on the streets, and he has 2 daughters who are supposed to do class 8 and they're living in the bush.
There is nothing out of order. Obviously, there is nothing out of order. What is it? Unless there's something else. You must quote the specific section that you are referring to? Yes.
I think I'm not able to really get whether this is a petition the honorable member is presenting or is debating. I'm very sure the whole house is lost somewhere.
That can't be true because it has gone through the processes of the House and it has been approved. So in the wisdom of the person who approved, he must have looked at all those concerns that you are trying to raise.
Perhaps the person, Mr. Speaker, who prepared this needs to be interrogated further so that to see whether this petition is in form of a petition.
You know you are completely out of order
Mr.
because
Speaker.
I am the one whom you are asking to be interrogated, and you probably have no power for the time being. Proceed and finish.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for protecting me. Land matters are very emotive, and we don't want to play with the issues of land because some of our members here have a lot of issues of this land, and I'm sure they'll comment about it. And I beg to continue and finish. So, Honorable Speaker, the petitioner requests that we make any matter necessary recommendation that it deems fit in the circumstances of the matter. And Honorable Speaker, I was requesting that the committee gives this matter within 60 days required by the standing orders, because these are very demanding case.
Now, Honorable Agoi, now you are headed the direction
okay.
which
and Honorable Speaker,
Mogaka.
and any other petitioners will ever pray. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker.
You know you had come very well, Honorable Agoi, but somewhere towards the end, I think you got carried away and therefore started debating it. Now you will have the opportunity to have that canvassed when it is taken to and it's actually hereby committed to the relevant committee. So you will have your time there. I do not know if there are members who want to speak to this. I see Honorable Wamunyinyi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have had issues of land brought up either in court, petition, or on some tribunal of some sort, Mr. Speaker. In this case, the honourable member is bringing a petition on behalf of a family which has been thrown out of their piece of land. This has happened with land grabbers across the country. We have private investors, we have individuals who have grabbed land, we have people who have encroached on public land, on forest, and even in areas where public has interest, Mr. Speaker. I do therefore support the petition and agree with the member, Mr. Speaker, that is necessary when such matters or petition of this nature is brought up, it is handled within the shortest possible time. We have seen petitions go to committees. You have directed, Mr. Speaker, that petitions be directed to some committees, and there is a specific period that is required to be handled in the committee. This has not happened. I'm only urging, Mr. Speaker, that committees should take petitions seriously. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Sochi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I support the petition by Honorable Agoi, the Member of Parliament for Sabatia. But I want to say, Mr. Speaker, is that every time we have a session, we have members coming up with petitions. But somehow, these petitions are not processed expeditiously by committees. So I think we need to look for a way of dealing with petitions in this House. I know in some jurisdiction, some parliamentary jurisdiction, we have a whole committee on matters of petition. So when we will be processing, amending the standing orders, we need to consider possibly having a committee on petition, because we cannot be having members coming up with the petitions and then those petitions lapse because the committees have not handled them. Second point, Mr. Speaker, is that what honorable member has raised is a common problem in most homesteads in Vihiga because of the pressure of land. Families are big and the land sizes are small. So we expect to have some challenges on matters of land. And I know at one point, the judiciary said that they are going to promote what we call the traditional dispute resolution mechanism, so that some of the issues like the ones Mheshimiwa has raised
Now,
can be...
Honorable Sotsi, now you will have your opportunity, Honorable Sotsi. You know, we cannot, I'm just making giving you opportunity for brief interventions, you know, to guide the committee as they debate this particular issue. But you are already giving what you would give in the committee. So I think your time is over. Thank you. Yeah. Fabian Muli, and that would be the end.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
And briefly.
It is true, our citizens are threat because of land grabbers. In this country, we are not able to respect the identity of ownership of the land because of the organized crime. These people, many are working within the government offices. These people, they are in the streets ready to harm our citizens, and in respect of the rule of natural justice, Honorable Speaker, this house, every time we're having issue of people crying their land will be taken, their land will be taken, it is the high time we establish a tribunal or we come with good measures to save our country on issue of land matters. Thank you.
Now that you've saved time for us, I'll give Honorable Kadhuri Murungi, and it should be brief.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I want to make a very brief comment on this petition by my friend, Honorable Agoi. Mr. Speaker, as he has clearly put it, it is very, very important that the land committee by Honorable Nyamai to expedite this matter and report to this House. This is one of the petitions where there are so many other petitions on land matters that has come to this House. So, Mr. Speaker, we hope this will be done with the utmost speed so that the family can be resettled. Thank you.
Next order.
Order number 5, papers.
As we give the leader majority the opportunity to table his papers, let me recognize in the public gallery students from Ngutani Boys Secondary School, Mwingi West of Kitui County, pupils from Sunrise Children Garden Primary School, Embakasi East of Nairobi County, and pupils also of Mugoio Junior Academy, Mbeere North of Embu County. Leader of Majority, Leader of Majority Party, Leader of Majority Party.
No, Chair, I was saying, you know, it's good to come welcome our children in the morning. Members don't want to welcome our children, and they really want to see their leaders and their parents. Honorable Speaker, I beg to lay the following papers on the table of the House today, Wednesday, June 26, 2019. Youth Enterprise Development Fund Board Performance Report for the period between June 2016 and May 2019. The annual report and financial statements of the Tom Mboya University College for the year ending 30th June 2017. The report of the Auditor General and the financial statements in respect of the following institutions for the year that ended 30th June 2018 and the certificate therein. Technical and Vocational Education and Training Authority, Coast Water Service Board, Youth Enterprise Development Fund, Kenya School of Law, and Kenyatta National Hospital. Number 4, the report of the Auditor General and financial statement in respect of the following constituencies for the year that ended 30th June 2018 and the certificate therein. Kikuyu constituency, Ruaraka constituency, Juja constituency, Dagaroti North constituency, Kabete constituency, and Kitutu Chache North constituency.
Very well. So we go to the next order.
Order number 6, notices of motion. Order number 7, questions and statements.
On this particular order, I'm only aware that there are ordinary questions. And to start off is Honorable Geoffrey Omuse, the member for Teso South.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I raise to ask the question number 291 of 2019 to the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury and Planning. Roman number 1, could the Cabinet Secretary provide an updated status on the government's preparedness for the August 2019 population census? 2, could the Cabinet Secretary also state whether the registration of persons will be undertaken manually or via biometric system, and further state the resources, including funding, allocated to undertake the exercise? Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Very well. That one will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Finance and National Planning. Next is the member for Kilifi South, Honorable Ken Chonga. Are we able to give the mic where the member is? Still doesn't seem to be proper. Please go to the next one. The one behind you would be better.
Yeah, I think this is better, Mr. Speaker. I stand to ask question number 292 of 2019, and this is on early pregnancies in the country. A, could the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether the task force set up to inquire into the early pregnancies into the country has concluded its work as per the terms of reference, and if so, provide the final report on the inquiry? B, what mechanism is the ministry putting in place to curb early pregnancies among school-going children in the country, and in particular in Kilifi South? Thank you.
That will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Education and Research. The next question by Honorable Dawood is deferred, is out on official duty. That one also by Honorable Ferdinand Wanyonyi is also deferred. He had made a request, which is reasonable. But as I proceed to ask other members to ask questions, I want to recognize in the speakers gallery students from Gathigiri Secondary School, Mwea County of Kirinyaga, Mwea constituency of Kirinyaga County. I should believe that that is the constituency represented to in the National Assembly by Honorable Kabinga Wachira. And by good coincidence, he's actually having a question. So Honorable Kabinga, ask you a question in presence of your students.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I'm not sure how to do this without my mic working. Honorable Speaker, my mic is not working on the other side, and that's where my question is, Honorable Speaker. Fine. Technology works, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I ask my question, let me once again recognize the presence of Gathigiri Secondary School. Mr. Speaker, this is one of the best performing schools that we have in Mwea constituency.
Now don't go that direction.
Now I'm going. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The only thing that I recognize on your part is that you actually techno-savvy.
Thank you, Mr.
You are
Speaker.
one of the few members who are asking questions using their phones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but it's also good to know that these are products of farmers that do the best rice in Africa, Mr. Speaker. So I think so you know it's good for you to know that. Mr. Speaker, I want to ask question number 294 of 2019, and this goes, question number 295, sorry, Mr. Speaker, of 2019, and this question goes to the Cabinet Secretary for Health. One, could the Cabinet Secretary state the current status of the construction of Wamumu Kenya Medical Research Institute KEMRI facility in Mwea constituency? Could the Cabinet Secretary provide details of the company awarded to the project, construction commencement date, scope of work, the range of services to be offered once complete, and the nature of medical facility intended to be constructed on the 100 acres of land donated by the Kirinyaga County government? Finally, number 3, Mr. Speaker, could the Cabinet Secretary confirm whether there is any provision in the contract safeguarding job opportunities for locals and construction of the said facility? And further, Mr. Speaker, state challenges that KEMRI may be facing in undertaking the project that has led to delays during construction of the said facility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. That one will be replied to before the Departmental Committee on Health. Next order.
Order number 8, motion, development and implementation of a curriculum for training students and pupils in schools on road safety.
Order, members. Honorable Amunyini and team. Order. Order, members. Order. Take your seats, please. Caucuses can handle their matters outside the chamber. On this particular one, the debate had been finalized, and therefore what remained was the question to be put. And I can confirm that we have the required numbers. And so I put the question, which is that concerned that the available reports indicate that on average, road traffic accidents in the country cause estimated 3,000 deaths, with many other victims injured and maimed as a result, placing Kenya among the countries with the highest road carnage globally. Further concerned that it is estimated that the cost to the economy from road traffic accidents is in excess of 300 billion annually, according to the National Transport Safety Authority, NTSA, Road Safety Status Report of 2015. Aware that the legislation and policies in place to a large extent address the key road safety risk factors, and the challenge is in implementation and enforcement, cognizant that the road safety awareness would help in combating road accidents in the country, acknowledging that Section 4.2 of the National Transport Safety Act mandates the NTSA to develop and implement road safety strategies and facilitate the education of members of public on road safety, recognizing that schools provide the largest and most concentrated group of members of the public who can benefit from road safety education. This House resolves that the national government urgently develop and implements a mandatory and examinable curriculum for training of students and pupils in primary and secondary schools on road safety. Will as many as of that opinion say aye? Many as of a contrary opinion say nay? The ayes have it. Next order.
Order number 9, the Crops Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 25 of 2019, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the Crops Act. Order number 10, the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development, Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 33 of 2019, first reading. a bill for an act of parliament to amend the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development Act and for connected purposes. Order number 11, the Assisted Reproductive Technology Bill, National Assembly Bill number 34 of 2019, first reading. A bill for an act of parliament to provide for the regulation of assisted reproductive technology, to prohibit certain practices in connection with assisted reproductive technology, to establish an assisted reproductive technology authority, to make provisions in relation to children born of assisted reproductive technology processes and for connected purposes. Order number 12, the law of contracts.
Order, Honorable Kositany. Honorable Kositany. Honorable Kositany. You know, there are ways of, greeting your members in the House. Take your seat. That is not one of them.
Order number 12, the Law of Contracts Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 1 of 2019, second reading.
Yes, Leader of Majority.
Honorable Speaker, first I want to go on record that I am moving this bill on behalf of my very good friend and member for Juja, Honorable Waititu, because of he's not feeling well. So we have agreed to move on his behalf, and my colleague, member for Tharaka, Senior Counsel, will second. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the Law of Contract Bill, Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 1 of 2019 be now read a second time. Speaker, also I want to go on record that from my faith background as a Muslim, we don't take interest. So, and if you are a Muslim and you take interest, you know the consequences, both in this world and in the hereafter. So, but as a leader, I want to move it on behalf of other Kenyans who in one way or the other, they are affected by this law. And Mr. Speaker, the main objective of this bill is to amend the Law of Contract, Cap 23, to provide that in case of a defaulter of payment of a loan by the borrower, the creditor must first realize the security of the principal. Very important. Speaker, I'll give a homegrown example. When we are borrowing from our SACCO here, there are members of parliament who sign for us. And these members of parliament have got security. But on the basis of trust, we sign for them as a guarantor. If that member of parliament defaults the money in the SACCO, the law currently says you go for the assets of the guarantor, and the principal hides. So we are saying, before you go to the guarantor, you look for the assets of the principal borrower, the person who got the money. And this has been the case, and there are many people out there, Mr. Speaker, who lose their property, their family property, because Honorable Duale or Honorable Washir or Honorable Junet made a guarantor on their behalf. They have disappeared, they didn't pay. Then you come and lose your property. So this law, I think, is very, very important. I have received a letter from the Attorney General saying that we wait for more discussion. No, and I want to tell government today that the legislative powers of the House lies with the 349 members. Yes, so private members' bills, if you have issues as government, you bring amendments to what they have brought, but you cannot step down. So when applying for a loan from a financial institution, Mr. Speaker, the institution usually requests the borrower for a guarantor. So it's the institution that says, can we have a guarantor? And when you get the guarantor, in case his or her assets cannot cover the cost of the loan, so he goes to a friend and he says, please, can you guarantee me? Because the bank, the SACCO has said, look for a guarantor. But when this borrower defaults in the payment of the loan, that same institution, after issuing the notice to both the guarantor and the borrower, chooses which assets to recover from the loan. So mainly, most of the time, they go for the asset of the guarantor. So what Honorable Wakape, the member for Juja, is saying is that you don't go for the guarantor. We amend the law, you go for the principal borrower. And I think it's a very, very important, is welcome, and I think is one of the things that he'll be remembered for as a member for Juja. So, Mr. Speaker, this should not be the case, as the assets of the borrower should be sold first, and he is the main beneficiary. So this law is it's a small bill, if you have a copy. It says the asset of the borrower must, because he is the one who benefited. Yeah, the guarantor didn't benefit out of goodwill. Maybe he's your relative, he's your friend. You helped him when he was in distress. So we are saying there's need for this amendment in order to ensure that the assets of the guarantor are protected. That's another principal objective of this bill, private members' bill. Are protected and only can be realized once the assets of the borrower have been exhausted. In a case where the borrower's assets have been exhausted and the amount of money have not been recovered in full, then you can go for the person who guaranteed that. So, Mr. Speaker, so if you look at clause 1 of the bill, it provides for a short title. Clause 2 of the bill provides for the amendment to section 3 of the Law of Contract Act, Cap 23, to provide that before a creditor pursues a guarantor in law, or she should first realize the assets of the borrower. That is in clause 2. And Mr. Speaker, the Committee of Justice, the chair was here, but there are members here. The Committee of Justice and Legal Affairs Committee tabled its report on the floor of the House on 30th April 2019, and it contains recommendations that will guide the House in considering this report. So the committee, in its report, has also agreed with the bill, and I urge members to do that. And the Speaker, we will deal with the matter of the Senate later in the afternoon or maybe Tuesday. That the Constitution is very clear. There are no lower house or upper house. The Constitution says this is the mandate of the National Assembly and this is the mandate of the Senate. And I was shocked yesterday, we're in a mediation, and the Senate was saying, no, wherever is appearing Parliament, we must remove it and put National Assembly and Senate. In fact, some were calling, we should rename the Senate as National Senate, because they have realized the issue. So I think this is a very important law. This is a very, very important law, because we are the ones who represent the people of Kenya. The only people, the sovereignty power of the people is delegated to the National Assembly representative. The Senate is supposed to deal with a corporate entity called counties. So the people of Kenya, their sovereign power has been delegated to their representative in this House. And for us to make sure we protect guarantors and deal with borrowers, we must pass this law and we must support it. I beg to move and ask Member for Tharaka to second.
Member for Tharaka. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second this very important amendment bill, which touches on section 20, which touches on the amendment of the law of contract, and basically to deal with the issue of borrowing by the principal borrower and a guarantor. It is the high time this House looked at the various laws that we inherited from England and India, especially laws touching on contract. Because those laws, in most times and in most cases, are not in consonance with the practice of the people of Kenya and what they actually desire to see as the law being implemented by our courts. While in law school, we learned that in the contracts of borrowing, there are two contracts. The first contract is the contract of the principal debt, and we have the contract of guarantee. We also learned that these contracts are enforceable separately
and it is for the borrower to choose which contract he chooses to enforce because they are all in his favor. In reality, the contract of guarantee is a secondary contract. The principal borrowing contract is what is the first contract, while the second contract is that contract of guarantee. The amendment sought seeks to enforce the fact that we must deal with the first contract first, after which we will deal with the second contract. And this is very important because when I used to go to court, I would see guarantors arguing that you cannot come for my property until you have exhausted the realization of the property of the principal debtor. And I, to a great extent, agreed with it, but the courts in Kenya would always say we have to enforce the two contracts as this is what the law is. It is now behoves on this House to put into statute what is going to be enforced by the courts without any question. And this is what is being proposed in this amendment, which amendment went through the Committee on Justice and Legal Affairs, and it was actually accepted as good law. We therefore have to enact a good law which our citizens will actually agree with and possibly benefit with. As it has been stated by the leader of majority while moving this bill, the person who benefits from a borrowing contract is the principal borrower. This is the person who gets the money. This is the person who spends the money the way he wishes, whether lavishly, whether in a useful manner, whether selfishly, whichever way. However, he is the beneficiary of the borrowing. Guarantors usually come in to assist because maybe this person does not have sufficient property to cover the indebtedness. This is why extra security must be taken from a person called a guarantor. For the guarantor to suffer the consequences of what he has done, it is vitally important that the principal debtor is actually held liable first. Let all his assets be realized. Let's have him pay with every penny. Where we go to court, let's have him committed to civil jail first. It is only after all the remedies are exhausted that we now go to the guarantor to say, you actually came in to save your friend, to bear the consequences. And this is what this good law is doing. There is a good report prepared by the Justice and Legal Affairs. Honorable members, you can go through this and you will confirm that we had great deliberations to agree to this, that in fact we must amend the law from whether the common law principle, the common law stand, or from the Indian position as envisaged by the Indian law of contracts, whatever it is, we must now come to what is actually Kenyan. And the Kenyan position is that for the guarantor to be held liable, let the principal debtor bear all the consequences up to the end, up to fruition, and it is only then, if there is a deficit, the guarantor shall be called upon to actually meet the obligation. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm in full agreement with this proposed amendment, and I urge the House to agree with the proposal so that we can amend the Law of Contracts Act, Cap 23, and entrench all our thoughts into the statute for purposes of being enforced by the courts without any question. With those few remarks, I beg to second. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much. So I propose a question, which is that the Law of Contract Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 1 of 2019, be read a second time. Honorable Junet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to support this bill. And Mr. Speaker, this is one of the best bills this House is passing. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the media never picks it. I don't know for what reason. You will hear of other things. You will never hear them serializing this bill as a very important bill, Mr. Speaker. But
why
anyway,
are you anticipating what the media will pick?
But Mr. Speaker,
to come tomorrow.
but Mr. Speaker, this bill is timely. Mr. Speaker, many Kenyans are suffering. because they have guaranteed someone a loan. Mr. Speaker, a guarantor is supposed to be just like a referee. Who knows this man who's borrowing? Then Honorable Washali says, I know him, he's a good man, then he signs for him. It's not that he's not taking the loan on his behalf, or he's not the one who's being given the loan, Mr. Speaker. Honorable Wamalo was just telling me that a lot of teachers in his place are not sleeping in their homes because they have guaranteed some people loans. So they are hiding themselves in bundus and in the farms that people are coming for them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if somebody has borrowed money from a SACCO or from the bank or from cooperative society, Mr. Speaker, the primary responsibility of paying that loan lies with the borrower. It can't move within a short period. The bank or the lender looks for the borrower, he can't find him, then he starts harassing now the guarantor, starts collecting his household items and utensils and cuckoos, Mr. Speaker, in the village. I have seen one of the SACCOs who have invaded a guarantor, took everything of his bed, his mattress, his chicken and everything, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that kind of mentality must stop in our country. And the only place where that can be stopped is in this house. So I want to thank Honorable Wakape for bringing this bill at this time, because he has realized that Kenyans are suffering, Mr. Speaker, through these lenders who don't care about, they care only about the interest they earn and the money they get from you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this bill will go a long way to make even credit cheap, because banks now will make sure that they engage the borrower in a manner that the borrower will be able to pay. Because nowadays, a borrower defaults in a month or 2 months, they go for the guarantor, because they know the guarantor who guaranteed him is a rich man, is somebody who can afford to pay on his behalf. So they don't even bother themselves with the borrower. They go for the guarantor immediately. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this bill, and I want to urge the members to support. This is one of the best bills that is going to pass through this House, and is going to make the life of Kenyans bearable, Mr. Speaker. Kenyans are suffering, Mr. Speaker, under this economic hardship that we are going through. The non-performing loans, the people who are defaulting in payments are very high in this country, Mr. Speaker. People are unable to meet their obligations, not because of their own making, but because of the economic conditions that they are living under in this country, Mr. Speaker. Some of them have done work for counties, some of them have done work for national governments, they are pending bills, they have not been paid, and they can't pay if they have not been paid. In fact, I want to thank His Excellency the President that he said by end of this month, all pending bills must be cleared. That will go timely to help the people who are suffering under have serious problems with banks that they have borrowed from. Mr. Speaker, with those few remarks, I support, and I would like to thank Honorable Wakape for bringing this bill. Thank you.
Member for Mbeere North. Member for Mbeere North. Okay, so then the next one, now I can't give, there are two from this other side. Let me look at somebody to my right. And the topmost is Honorable Washali.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
And as I say topmost, you're actually number 8, which means there's a lot of interest to my left. That's very interesting.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. And from the onset, I want to thank Honorable Waititu for bringing this bill. The bill, Honorable Speaker, is very small in size. But what it carries, Honorable Speaker, is really going to help Kenyans. Because, Honorable Speaker, many borrowers who would have even easily got guarantors, some guarantors would easily get scared in guaranteeing because, Honorable Speaker, of the experience the previous guarantors has had. Therefore, for honest business people, genuine businessmen who are looking for guarantors will easily also get people who will guarantee, because the people who will be guaranteeing will not be scared of guaranteeing, because if the borrower is a genuine businessman, he will definitely pay, and of course, if he doesn't pay, then he will be subjected to a payment. Honorable Speaker, we need to look at the reasons that would make one to borrow or seek to be guaranteed. You will get friends to come and guarantee, and sometimes even those friends are not very well known to the principal borrower. You will even get some people, friends of friends, guaranteeing for a borrower. You will get, in other cases, you will get even in-laws. You will get a brother-in-law coming in to guarantee, and yet the reasons why the principal borrower is borrowing may not be sound to a level where he will be able to pay the loans he is taking, and risking the person, risking the property of the person who is guaranteeing. Honorable Speaker, I just want to support my colleagues who thanked Honorable Waititu for bringing this bill, and ask other members to also think, because many of these problems we undergo as Kenyans can be solved in this House. Honorable Speaker, alongside this bill, there is also the bill related to sureties and bonds in court of laws. Sometimes you would find someone has been arrested, he goes to ask someone to guarantee, to bring a surety, and you find once that person is released from the courts or from prison, he disappears. And alongside this, I think, Honorable Speaker, we may have to think out of the box, such that once we finish this, we must also look at the laws that manages the aspects of sureties and bonds in courts, so that we can also be sure that those who are going to give sureties in courts and in police stations are also protected by a law that will then mean that the person who has been arrested or the one who is supposed to be given a surety, first of all, faces the law or gives another surety, counter surety, so that the person who is giving a surety does not endanger his property just because he has given a surety. Otherwise, Honorable Speaker, I want to thank members and request them to support Honorable Waititu for coming up with this law, so that he can go on record that Honorable Waititu is the one that saved the guarantors from their property. I thank you, Honorable Speaker, and I support.
Next will be Honorable Atandi Onunga.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute to this bill. Mr. Speaker, this bill is very good. But, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to say that these products requiring guarantors were introduced by financial institutions because of the realization that there are some people who have very good ideas, business ideas, but they do not have capacity to implement those ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, banks decided to introduce these aspects of guarantors to help these people acquire resources to implement their ideas. So, Mr. Speaker, the idea here is that the applicant is not the person who is being appraised. The person to be appraised is the guarantor, because the applicant is known not to have capacity to get the resources. So basically the idea was very good, Mr. Speaker, because it was intended to help people have capacity to start businesses. That is the reason why the solidity of the guarantor was very significant. And banks basically went for the guarantors when when there was a default on the loan. That situation, Mr. Speaker, may not pertain now, and that is the reason why I support this amendment. But, Mr. Speaker, as somebody who was in the financial sector, I think that the idea to have people guaranteeing others to get resources to start businesses is something which we need to support. And most of us are aware that you could be having a relative who does not have money to begin a business. And even if they began that business with the resources you gave them, if they, in case of a default and the financial institutions went for their assets, that business would collapse and the person would go to zero. So, Mr. Speaker, to some level, to some extent, I think if this law is repealed the way we want to do it, then maybe we are going to discourage people from supporting others to start up businesses. So I think that's something that we may need to check, Mr. Speaker. But today, Mr. Speaker, banks have sophisticated products that may not even require people to guarantee each other. We have what we call unsecured facilities. These ones were not there before. The cases of teachers, for instance, in my village, that cannot sleep in their houses because of guaranteeing others, is a realistic example of how this process of guaranteeing has led to suffering. Some people who you guarantee have disappeared, and the lenders come to you, they want to attach your assets. So it has both positive and negative aspects. What I wanted Parliament to check is whether this amendment of this law is going to occasion a situation where we will not be able to get people to support others who want to start businesses, or people who want to begin life, you know, I will not mind, for instance, if I guaranteed somebody and they are unable to pay the loan. If they come for my assets, I think that would be justifiable. But I think the financial institutions need to make it very clear when they are asking for guarantors, that the guarantors must be made aware that these are the implications of guaranteeing. So, Mr. Speaker, I support the amendment, but I want Parliament to relook at this law the way it is, because it has a potential to cause people to be mean to the society, to stop supporting others, you know. So we will not be able to have a germinating society. That is one, Mr. Speaker. The other issue, which I wanted to say, is that ultimately we need to, as Parliament, we need to agree that the need for security by financial institutions may not be sustainable in certain sectors. There are some businesses that you may not need security to be given facilities. Like if you, for instance, you are in the business of supplying government, if we have a government system that pays suppliers in time, then maybe we need to agree that those kind of businesses may not be required to supply security when they are applying for facilities from the financial institutions. Otherwise, we will not be able to have people starting businesses. We will not be able to have people, startups will be very difficult. And especially now that the government is not paying in time, most people who are in the business of supplying government are finding it very difficult to access financial facilities. And it's actually derailing the performance of our economy. So I think what we need to agree also, which we need to check as Parliament, is let us be able to help the financial sector to be able to have facilities, easy facilities, and let government be able to pay their suppliers in time, in which case now banks will be able to modify their products in line with what the law provides for, especially people supplying government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, even if you are not top on the list, I'm giving Honorable Mwirigi Paul, because that is the topmost to my right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this.
Yes, indeed, he came after you, but you are, Honorable Kabinga, you are number 9. And he was number 4. So there are several other members before you. Proceed, Honorable Mwirigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to channel my voice onto this bill. Mr. Speaker, many families, they live in worry when you grant somebody to borrow some cash, and you are the one who is followed by the granting entity. So, Mr. Speaker, this amendment bill, it has come the right time when, Mr. Speaker, we are supposed to do something so that we can curtail this to the granting entities, so that first, before they persuade the guarantor, first they deal with the...
Order, Honorable Sankok. Order. Order, Honorable Sankok. Proceed, Honorable Mwirigi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, before they persuade the guarantor, Mr. Speaker, they deal first with the principal borrower to the maximum. Then, after maybe they have dealt with this with the borrower, so another law is followed whereby now they can persuade the guarantor, Mr. Speaker. This should be done after they have done away with the borrower what he has borrowed, and even the terms of granting, or the terms which are put in place for the guarantor who is being allowed to give an okay for the borrower to be given the grant. Mr. Speaker, in most cases, the people who normally borrow cash or they borrow money, Mr. Speaker, you tend to see all the guarantor, there is some forces which drive him to give an okay and to this person so that he can be accepted to being given this the cash, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support this bill, since it will help many to survive in their businesses, Mr. Speaker, without being worried that anytime they can be persuaded or their things can be taken away by the grantors, by the granting entities. Mr. Speaker, the granting entities, they normally persuade the guarantors, since they know the guarantors, they have a lot, or they are able to settle those debts, even though they are not aware why the borrower has failed to pay back. So, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support. Thank you.
Honorable Mbui.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I also rise to support this bill by the Honorable Francis Waititu. And I want to begin by thanking him, because Honorable Waititu has just done what has brought us all to this house, which is to legislate and to represent the people, and he's combined it very well, because this is an excellent piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker, which actually helps to represent the people and ensure that they are protected. So this is a good fight for the Kenyan people. Mr. Speaker, this bill is straightforward, because it basically seeks to protect the guarantors, so that in case one guarantees somebody to take a loan, then their property will not be the first point of call when there is any defaulting that takes place. So basically, this is an excellent idea. I have come across quite a number of people who have lost property, and because of this kind of situation. Mr. Speaker, I must confirm, I personally, my mother lost 10 acres of land because of guaranteeing a relative, an in-law. And Mr. Speaker, you see, what happens is that in our traditional African culture, we are extremely generous to family, extended family, friends, in-laws. So it's very unlikely that if one has a piece of property and a relative wants some assistance in the form of a guarantee, not by giving them the money, then most of us would probably say yes. And that is generally how we are as Africans. So it is something that has been used and abused by the banks for a long, long period, where they look at the properties of the guarantor, and if they look more attractive and easier to sell, they quickly get rid of those, dispose of them, and then pay back their loans. So, Mr. Speaker, what Honorable Waititu has done today is protect Kenyans and ensure that Kenyans get to be able to operate without this fear. Mr. Speaker, we also understand that it is obvious that for us to grow our economy, we need to borrow money. But we have to do it in a way that those people who are borrowing are the ones that carry the liability for their loans. so that they can inject into their businesses and try and multiply the money. But if people who borrow are not held liable, and we try to hold the guarantors more liable than them, then honestly it means that people who borrow money for luxurious purposes, and maybe the purpose for which loans are meant will not be met. So with those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to say I support it, and I want to say that, Honorable Waititu, let's be prepared for backlash from the banks. You remember the last time we had a bill on interest capping, and the banks have tried to maneuver their ways, and circumvent the law. So basically, I do believe that even on this one, we are going to have a lot of backlash, but we'll support you and we'll stick with it all the way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. As I give the next member, let me recognize in the gallery Kinungi Primary School from Naivasha constituency of Nakuru County. Of course, ably represented here by Honorable Kihara.
Thank you.
Now, going to my right, I will give Honorable Arbele Malimo. You want to speak to this one on Arbele, or you are expecting another one? If it's another one, then I would give the... You want to speak to this one, Honorable
Yeah,
Arbele?
let me say a word there, Mr.
Okay.
Speaker. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to support this bill, contractors bill. Mr. Speaker, banks have actually always been lending money to borrowers in this country. And by doing so, the borrowers will be required to provide guarantors. And in the absence of the borrower defaulting the loan, the bank actually goes after the guarantors. So it is very important that the guarantor should be protected in a way that the bank should go after the person who has borrowed the money from the bank, so that the bank can be able to ask the borrower to provide a collateral. And the event that the borrower doesn't pay the money on time, then the bank, instead of actually frustrating the guarantor, they can be able to go after the property of the borrower. That way, the banks can be able to easily recover their money. Mr. Speaker, the banks have also actually been trying to charge unnecessary interest from the person borrowing the money from the bank. And actually, by the time the borrower will be able to pay the amount of money he has borrowed from the bank, it becomes very hard for this person actually to survive. Because the amount of interest accrued from the loan will actually become very cumbersome for this person to be able to pay back that amount of money. With these few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I support this bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, Honorable Akungu Amalwa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, first and foremost, I want to congratulate Mheshimiwa Francis Waititu, the MP for Chuja, for deciding to bring this contract amendment bill. Mr. Speaker, the contract amendment bill, it deals most of the time with the guarantor, the issue of the guarantor and the borrower. Mr. Speaker, we passed a law here on matrimonial property. And as a spouse, you cannot sell family property without the spouse consent. That was the reason, because many people, many families, Mr. Speaker, were losing their homes because you find a husband or one of the spouse has gone to the bank, he has picked a loan without informing the spouse. Mr. Speaker, when we guarantee people here, we don't go for spouse consent. And it goes without saying, people can lose family property, Mr. Speaker, because you've guaranteed someone. And that's why the importance of this law is in the same spirit of the spouse consent, Mr. Speaker. Many times colleagues here, when they want to get loans, we guarantee them because of issue of reference. We don't even go further to know even how much are they borrowing
from the SACCO, Mr. Speaker. I've been guaranteeing everybody, Mr. Speaker. I don't even know how much they normally collect from the Pacoso SACCO, Mr. Speaker. It's because of the trust that we have. But if you allow the person giving you money to go for you who is the guarantor without exhausting the assets of the borrower, Mr. Speaker, it's going to be very unfair. So this bill is very critical. It's going to protect the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, in my village, I've had teachers coming to spend at my place just because whoever they borrowed the money from, they were the guarantors, they are after them, Mr. Speaker. They don't give them peace. They go in the night, they want to auction everything that they have. And yet, Mr. Speaker, they've left the person who borrowed. Mr. Speaker, the borrowers have become sharper. They've even gone to an extent of conspiring with the people they borrowed money from. So instead of this person following the borrower, instead he'll follow the guarantor. Conspiracy has been going on, Mr. Speaker. So it's become something which is very difficult, and this law is going to protect the guarantors, Mr. Speaker. To the issue of capping interest rates, we must resist what the governor of Central Bank wants to put across. We cannot leave banks, Mr. Speaker, to regulate themselves. Banks cannot continue making abnormal profits at the expense of the business people. Mr. Speaker, when you look at the law of demand and supply, naturally when the price of a commodity has gone down, the demand is supposed to go high because there will be many people who can be able to afford that particular product. But in the banking sector, Mr. Speaker, it is now the opposite. Because banks have conspired and now they are not giving SMEs money because they think it's a risk and it's something to do with integrity. And that's why Central Bank as a regulator, Mr. Speaker, it has a role to play. Many commercial banks, they don't want to give money to the small, medium enterprises. And the government is also competing the small mwananchi in terms of borrowing. The law that was passed, which was sponsored by Honorable Judy Jomo, the servant of the great people of Kiambu, we want to tell whoever wants to amend the interest capping, this House will not accept. Because it's in the good interest of the small, medium enterprises. Mr. Speaker, when you go to the bank, they've categorized politicians that politically risky people. You're not even given loans. So even the politicians, Mr. Speaker, we are at risk. You cannot get a loan. So we are only surviving by using our Pacoso loans that we have here, Mr. Speaker. But they also have a limitation. You cannot borrow much. So this contract law amendment bill, Mr. Speaker, I'm humbly requesting the honorable members that we should be able to support it. Support it for the purposes of guaranteeing even peace in homes. And is in line with the matrimonial property bill that we passed here, Mr. Speaker. Today, if you want to sell your house, you cannot just sell your house without the spouse consent. If you don't have a spouse, you must have an affidavit to prove that. Because many families who are losing houses, most of the time mothers could realize auctioneers coming, you are kicked out of the house without knowing that your husband had used that family house as collateral. So this bill, it is very, very critical. It is going to protect the interests of families. It's going to protect the interests of small and medium enterprises. But we want to tell those borrowers who want to harvest where they never sow that the rule of thumb says, in a circle they normally say, save regularly, borrow wisely, and pay promptly. Those of you who are borrowing money, you must put into good use of that money. I've seen some people, Mr. Speaker, they borrow money to go marry many other wives or many husbands, because we are also seeing women nowadays also marrying, Mr. Speaker. So we are saying those borrowers, please borrow wisely, put the money into the business you wanted, Mr. Speaker, and pay back promptly. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to say I support. I thank you.
Shall we have Honorable Wachira before Honorable Wachira Kabinga, we must have Honorable Deputy Speaker, Honorable Cheboy.
Thank you. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. And when members are claiming who came here earliest, of course, you would recognize that I was the earliest member here. And I thank you for the opportunity. Now, Mr. Speaker, I want to take this opportunity also to support the bill that is before us here, Mr. Speaker, I am a student of contract, and like yourself and many other lawyers here, you would understand when you go to law school, the first case that comes before even you start the process of studying law itself, is one case, Carlisle versus Carbolic Smoke Ball, an 1893 case, which is the basis of contract. And as many of my colleagues have stated, it is extremely unfortunate that many institutions, when persons borrow, when they default, the first port of call is the guarantor. It's because they are the easiest option to get. Of course, as I even support this, I must warn members of public to be very careful when they are when they accept to be guarantors. Well, this particular, if this one goes through, it will make it a little better. But we must also be careful, so that when you are guaranteed, try to know the person you are guaranteeing. You heard the member for Kimilili just a few minutes ago saying that he has guaranteed 101 members here every other day. In fact, that is something that should go on public, that members also, as they do whatever they are doing, basically they are also borrowing like everybody else. They are looking for funds. We are not self-sufficient. We don't have everything. We keep borrowing from SACCOs. We borrow from banks who declare us as politically exposed person. In other words, they are trying to use a good language of saying that we are risky borrowers. You know, very surprisingly, Mr. Speaker, because, you know, being a member of parliament, for example, you have a salary. That makes you one of the least risky persons. I think the only reason why we are considered politically exposed and therefore risky is because whenever we borrow, we end up using even the money that we borrow for our constituents. I remember in the 9th Parliament, I borrowed some little money somewhere from a bank here, and the entire amount that I borrowed, I took it for Harambes. I remember that it was about 300,000-400,000. And immediately I took it to a hospital in my constituency. Then it was called Keringate because they wanted 100,000 for them. I gave out the money. That probably is what makes us a bit exposed in terms of risk. But what I'm saying, we must be careful as public that whenever we are guaranteeing, we must be able to know the persons we are guaranteeing. But with this kind of amendment that we get from the honorable member here, it will give us an opportunity to first exhaust avenues against the person who has borrowed before we start thinking about the guarantors. So that, you know, a guarantor would be somebody who would be coming to attest that this person is of good standing, but not necessarily to say, in case of default, I'm the one who is going to pay, and yet when it comes to the consumption of whatever has been borrowed, he is not involved in it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
I'd call out Honorable Kabinga. You may use the dispatch box. And Honorable Afura Munyinyi, who is next on my left, top on my left, is claiming that Honorable Kabinga has just come. My machine is very correct.
I want to confirm, Mr. Speaker, that I was here at exactly 9. And that's why I had also come to attend to my question. So, Honorable Speaker is out of order. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand to support this particular motion. This particular amendment by my good friend, Honorable Wakape from Juja constituency. It is coming at the right time when many Kenyans are suffering, Mr. Speaker, because of the banks wanting to go for the guarantor as the first charge, Mr. Speaker. And I think this bill, what this bill is simply saying is that the borrower and the properties or collaterals presented by the borrower should serve as the first charge. The guarantor should come in next. And what we're saying, Mr. Speaker, is that when the borrower fails to honor his commitments, banks are very good at lashing at the guarantor's properties.
And this has caused a lot of distress. Families have broken down. And some of the guarantors, Mr. Speaker, have even ended up in hospitals, and some of them are somewhere else and not in this world, Mr. Speaker. And therefore, this is a very, very, very serious amendment that we need to take very seriously. And I would ask that we do not just focus on banks, Mr. Speaker. There is also the cooperative movement where many guarantors are suffering. I have worked in an environment, in an environment where I've been a member of a cooperative society for 20 years, Mr. Speaker, with the U.S. Embassy, and I have witnessed many guarantors suffering because of borrowers who sometimes leave their place of work, and wherever they go, they no longer care to service their loans, Mr. Speaker, and this ends up in the hands of the guarantors. I've seen many people whose houses, properties, who have been going without salary, Mr. Speaker, a whole family that has been used to getting salary from the breadwinner ends up not getting salary because somebody borrowed and you guaranteed that person, and that person is enjoying somewhere. And because you are the one who is left in the employment, Mr. Speaker, you are left without salary. It's a high time that we look at some of these laws, amend them, so that you only go to the guarantor when you have exhausted everything else. The guarantor should also be given a chance, Mr. Speaker, to also identify any other property that the borrower could be having and communicate the same to the bank. And the bank should cooperate. You should have a clause, Mr. Speaker, that compels the bank to cooperate with the guarantor before an action is taken. There are borrowers, Mr. Speaker, who have a lot of properties out there, yet they are known by the guarantor but not by the bank, and the guarantor could point them out. We should have a leeway where even if such properties are not charged, Mr. Speaker, they are followed up and taken up before you move to the guarantor. In the same way, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important that these banks handle issues or matters, property with decorum, Mr. Speaker. I should also be given, if I am a guarantor, I should also be able to give alternate properties to the bank as opposed to rushing in and taking some of the matrimonial homes that extend the distress to some of the people who may not even have known. The children, the families in those houses may not have known when a deal was struck between the borrower and the guarantor. And the guarantor may not have extended the same information to the family. And therefore, it's important that these banks handle these issues with decorum, Mr. Speaker, with respect, and also ensure that they cause minimum stress to the families that are affected. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, I highly support this particular amendment that will touch on the Contracts Act, Cap 23, to be amended. And this should be done quickly, Mr. Speaker, because it is something that is going to affect positively many families out there who are probably just about to suffer from the existing law. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
We shall have Honorable Wafula Wamunyinyi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to also support this motion by the Honorable Waititu, which is fairly straightforward, Mr. Speaker, as it provides for the lender or bank to first exhaust all measures, including going for the borrower's securities, assets, before going to the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, usually, like my colleague Chris Omala said here, we sign, for guaranteeing even our colleagues here in Parliament, you never even want to know how much one is taking out of trust. And that, I'm sure, also extends to other members of the public. When they are guaranteeing another one is out of trust, they know each other, and you never expect that someone is going to default so that they come for you. But usually it's helping the other one realize their goals. So this piece of legislation is such an important one, Mr. Speaker, as it prevents the lender from going for the guarantor before exhausting other measures, including first realizing the security of the principal borrower. Mr. Speaker, I want to say two things related to this, Mr. Speaker, and particularly when it relates to a borrower. For instance, in this case, I'm not quite sure what the main act provides for, but where, in the SACCOs, there's provision for cover, insurance cover for members in the event of death or a default of any kind, that can be taken care of. But where one dies and possibly there is no cover, there need to be provision also to deal with such cases of, in the event of death, when one, like if borrowed from a bank and, death comes. That usually is unfortunate. One could possibly be on track repaying the borrowed amount, but then death catches in and it becomes a difficult issue. Where there is no provision or cover, insurance cover, usually is very difficult. That is something which we need to look at. And then strengthen our SACCOs. Strengthen the management, improve the management of our SACCOs, increase accountability, and ensure that they are run transparently to help those serving in those SACCOs. I also, on this particular issue, because it's to do with borrowing and lending, Mr. Speaker, the issue my colleagues have mentioned about interest rates. All of us borrow, Mr. Speaker, from the banks, and we have suffered at the hands of the banks. You have been paying a loan for years, and it never reduces. You only pay the interest rates. So it is important that members are reminded, if there's an attempt to bring these changes to the House, we will reject them. We will join hands and ensure that those changes they want to bring do not get anywhere, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I said, this piece of legislation is fairly straightforward, and only you can see from its objective of, it's being brought. It is fairly straightforward, and I don't want to also take too long to allow other colleagues to also make their comments. I wish to say that I'll support this, and will ensure that when the other one is brought about the interest rates, we will reject it. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That end now. Honorable Tum, member for Nandi. Wait, just a minute. Yes.
Honorable Speaker, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this bill. Honorable Speaker, as we will pass this bill, people are going to be made responsible. Whatever they have been given, they will utilize in the right way. Many people in this nation are crying because they guaranteed some people who borrowed loans. Their land has been sold. Their animals have been sold. I know of a particular woman in my county who guaranteed a politician, and her property was sold. The only animal the mother ate was sold, and up to now she has not paid. That lady is crying day in, day out. So let people be responsible. When they take loans, let them utilize those loans in the right way. Let the borrower be made to sweat for their own, whatever they have eaten. As the Bible says, you should eat the bread of your own sweat. So the banks should be made responsible to go for the borrowers. They should be thorough in their work when they are giving out loans, and they should not make Kenyans to pay what they have not utilized. So their assets should be sold so that somebody can ask for a loan knowing that they are going to pay. There are many people whose land has been sold and they are crying. So, Honorable Speaker, I'm saying this law is very good. It is going to cause Kenyans to be responsible. You ask what you are going to pay. You don't make another person to cry. You don't make the children of another person not go to school. And you don't increase the people who are landless in our country. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
We shall now have Honorable Mogaka Kemosi, member for West Mugirango.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also rise to support this very important proposed amendment on several reasons, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've been a student of contract law, both in the university level and at the law school. And I clearly understand the pattern in which several guarantors have been undergoing in this country, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this provision of a grantor coming in to stand for the principal debtor is not a new provision. Mr. Speaker, this one dates back to the years of 1867 also. And on several occasions, Mr. Speaker, the courts have held in different ways when it comes to guaranteeing the principal debtor. Mr. Speaker, the courts have never shied off from attaching the assets of the guarantors, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this proposed amendment is important because it gives a provision that in case of default by the principal borrower, the creditor should first realize the assets of the principal borrower before proceeding to court to recover from the assets of the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, it should be noted that the current law as it stands today, it does not have that particular provision. Therefore, the honorable member who has brought this proposed amendment, he was well guided to come up with this particular provision. This particular provision, if passed by this House, and I'm very sure it will be passed by this House, it will give peace to innocent guarantors who have been undergoing the burden of paying the amount that has been advanced to the principal debtors, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some of the principal debtors really don't borrow money for good use. Some of them borrow to go and marry more women. Some of them borrow to go, travel abroad and other, issues like that. And when it comes to recovery, Mr. Speaker, these people are unable to pay. And this is where an innocent guarantor comes in and all the money is recovered from him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it is therefore important that in this age, that the principal debtor is held liable. If the principal debtor has taken a loan, the lending institutions should first recover from his assets before proceeding to recover from the grantor. Mr. Speaker, this particular norm is all over in the Republic of Kenya, even where I come from, Mr. Speaker. Not only teachers, but even innocent public servants, even those ones working in the private, sector. They have been made, Mr. Speaker, to undergo a punishment that is not theirs. They have been made, to pay for the debts which they never, incurred, to pay for the loans which they never took, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, you should also know that even the financial institutions, banks, of late, Mr. Speaker, they are even proceeding to recover the amount which is in default from the accounts of the guarantors without even following the due process of, the law, Mr. Speaker, which is an irregularity from the beginning. Mr. Speaker, even some financial institutions are currently recovering from the tools of trade and livestock which is also exempted from the law that it should not be recovered from. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this amendment. This is a very important amendment that will bring sanity to the financial institutions in terms of principal debtor versus guarantor as it's concerned. I support, Mr. Speaker.
Before I give to the next speaker, allow me to introduce quite a number of schools. First is at the public gallery, we have South Teto Girls High School from Mukurweini constituency, Nyeri County. We have Kaui Secondary School, Kitui West constituency, Kitui County. They are the speakers gallery. At the speakers gallery, also we have Mogotio Girls High School, Mogotio constituency, Baringo County. And then at the public gallery, we have Gatamayo High School from Rari constituency, Kiabu County. All those schools are welcome. Shall we have Honorable Sankok David?
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker, for giving me this opportunity, Honorable Speaker, to inject my voice in this very important Law of Contract Amendment Bill 2019. Honorable Speaker, and let me begin by congratulating Honorable Waititu for bringing such a very important bill, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, because our laws are borrowed largely from India and UK, Honorable Speaker, and we should actually customize and our laws into what our Kenyan citizens want. And this bill have gone through public participation, and this is what Kenyans want. And what Kenyans want is that let the borrower, who actually is the principal beneficiary of this loan, who may have used this loan in ways that will not raise funds to pay back the loan. Some borrowers borrow loans for such reasons that are not business-oriented. Some of them I've heard the honorable member saying, borrow so that they can marry more wives. Some borrow to travel abroad. Some borrow sometimes for alcoholism, and some borrow for other use that may not be able to assist them in repayment of this loan. Honorable Speaker, and in all those ways, the guarantor is not involved. When the bank was giving loan, Honorable Speaker, it did not involve the borrower and the guarantor together, Honorable Speaker, and it is and our laws says that when there is default, the bank chooses either to go for the property of the borrower or the guarantor. And the bank did not choose who to give money when they were lending this money. So they should not also have the right to choose who they will go for, either the borrower or the guarantor. It should be the borrower who is the principal beneficiary of this money that the banks will go for first and as a priority. Honorable Speaker, it also pains Kenyans, especially when you are a guarantor, that sometimes banks collude with the borrowers, and the borrowers intentionally hide money. Some of these borrowers are actually advised by the bank who to choose as guarantors, because the banks have seen your bank account and they know how much you have been able to put in the bank, deposit every now and then. So they will tell the borrower, and sometimes even it's a collusion, go and look for Honorable Kabinga because his bank account is fat. Let him become the guarantor. When you default, we'll go for him. We don't even know if they'll go and share the borrowed money. And then they assume he have default. And they choose not the one that they have shared the money, who is the borrower, but choose the guarantor who was not involved in this process of borrowing. Honorable Speaker, some guarantors, some borrowers also are very intelligent. When they are going to borrow, they hide their assets into several companies with very funny names, so that when they are not able to pay, then the guarantor will be followed. Some of them have a lot of assets, even outside the country, but they are in the names of companies, in the names of wives, in the names of daughters and sons. So the bank will not go for them. It will choose the easier route, which is the guarantor. And you know, the guarantor will not hide his property because it's not under any threat, because they have never borrowed any loan, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, some of these banks collude. And that is why, for us, as a house which make laws, we have seen the suffering of guarantors. We just want to protect a guarantor. And by extension, we are also protecting the borrower. Because at this trend, nobody will guarantee any Kenyan to get loan. And when we stop guaranteeing because of the fear that your property will be confiscated, Honorable Speaker, then there will be no borrowing in Kenya. And we know some borrowers are very intelligent, progressive business people that borrow money and make more profit, employ Kenyans, pay taxes to this country and economically change our country, Honorable Speaker. So the issue of borrowing is all over the world. And some people have become rich and they have economically empowered even their own nation and their own families and even a whole country by money that they borrowed and invested wisely. But if we go by this trend, then it will be very difficult for people to borrow because guarantors will not be there. But once we protect the guarantor, all borrowers of goodwill, all borrowers who are progressive, who will invest wisely, they will easily get guarantors. Honorable Speaker, but as far as the guarantor's assets are the first to be confiscated, Honorable Speaker, then you will find, since we don't have spiritual eyes, or we are not prophets, to know who is a wise investor, who is a progressive businessman, and then we will not guarantee anybody. And Honorable Speaker, this will economically affect our nation. And that is why, Honorable Speaker, I support this bill, because it is just simply says that let us first of all start with the principal borrower, the principal beneficiary. Let us exhaust his asset or her asset. And then after that, if we have exhausted everything, that is when we'll go. And we'll not give that leeway to the bank to choose, because they did not choose the borrower, they did not choose the guarantor. It is the guarantor who chose, it's the borrower who chose the guarantor, and the guarantor agreed in a good heart to guarantee, Honorable Speaker. So, Honorable Speaker, I do support this bill because it protects both the guarantor and even the borrower, because borrowers will get guarantors, but at this trend, we'll never get guarantors. Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. I do support this bill.
Honorable Muri Fabian, member for Kangundo.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to articulate and join my colleagues in appreciating also the work of Honorable Francis Waititu for coming with this legislative proposal. Honorable Speaker, the contract in contract law is come through invitation to treat. And this invitation to treat, it came with the offer where the two people, the two persona will agree on the terms in the contract. But the school of thought we come from, when this contract law was coming within our judiciary in Kenya, we were not able to establish whether one person can be easily identifiable or known where he is. So that time, we used not to have phones, we used not to have to be in digital world. So it was not easy to track the somebody who has been given some financial assistance or any kind of borrowing he has done. And that's my understanding, that we needed a guarantor by that time. Honorable Speaker, it is now gone to an extent that the financial institutions, they are misusing this opportunity. The witness has been now being forced to do the duties of the principal of the person who was given the money. In phenomena of maximization and exploitation of the principal, that is the person who was given loan, the financial institution, they are using the clause-related principles who can be able to pay for the loan. And that's why we say that this legislative proposal, it has come at the right time. All the institutions which are giving money, they should exploit all the avenues before they think about witness or guarantor, whatever the case I'll call them. But now, the fusion of the law of the writer is this. We want to bring this legislative proposal at this time. Do we still need a witness? It is the fusion of the law of the writer to give us, in terms of the agreement to treat, they need to give the duties of that witness, what the witness is supposed to do. But the witness shall be subject to guarantee to pay for the failure of somebody who was given money. I understand that people look for loans for good faith. We don't want to make laws for the side that by putting the side that we are making laws for criminals. We are making laws for society. And that's why we are saying Kenyans borrow with good faith. Because one is borrow with good faith, what are the parameters this person is supposed to operate as individual but not with guarantors? So this one is told to be left with the fusion of the law for the writer of the offer of the agreement. He's the one supposed to show us, because there is invitation to treat, how did these two people come to operate this law, where I say I will support the legislation proposal, because it is going to define, it is going to give a defense, it is going to make sure that the guarantors are not misused. Our society, we are now a borrowing society. If you check our Kenyan, they are suffering because of Mshwari, Fuliza, everybody is borrowing. But the economy is not the people who are not able to pay. The question is that our people who are borrowing, is this economy giving an opportunity to borrow money and make profit? We are living where you get like every phone. And the honorable members in this house also, they can agree with me. Many people operate with Fuliza. So because the society, we are going to economical borrowing, it is the high time financial institution should understand this. They should be able to see the capacity. It is also high time, honorable members, our young people should not be exploited by taken to CRB. For the first time before you give the loan, you should be able to understand if this person has capacity to borrow. But now this phone borrowing thing, so long as you have the SIM card, you can borrow. If that is the capacity to borrow, did you check the capacity to pay? So this is where I'm saying that, Honorable Speaker, it is high time the invitation to treat in terms of contract law should be maximized by the past person who is inviting that to treat to borrow. And I like to support this legislative proposal, and wishing we can have more, which we are going to promote, economical factors which affect our citizens as individuals. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Next to my right is Honorable Mutunga Kanyuithia, member for Tigania West.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to contribute to the Contract Law Amendment Bill before the House this morning. Honorable Speaker, the need to protect those people who guarantee others is paramount. We are a country that is not able to employ as many people as we are able to train. And in that case, it therefore applies that there will be many more, especially the younger people, requiring money to start businesses. Therefore, we need to promote more of support in terms of guaranteeing so that the youth can get into business. So if this is abused, and as has occurred many times, according to many speakers, and according to the experiences that we've had, Honorable Speaker, I think we will not be able to support our youth to start businesses. Honorable Speaker, I would also like to allude to the fact that when one gets into a contract, especially to supply goods and services, and it takes forever to be paid, therefore it depends this particular person in terms of realizing the payment as per the agreement. I would like to urge, Honorable Speaker, that whenever a contract is issued, and whenever we have people supplying goods and services, in tune with what the President did in the second supplementary estimate, I would like to launch this effort in trying to clear the pending bills, because many people have been waiting for a long time. And some, of course, have suffered because the contracts have got specific deadlines and specific provisions that must be met. So, Honorable Speaker, this law comes, or this amendment comes at the right time to try and secure those who are generous enough to extend their guarantees to those who may need. Honorable Speaker, in this country, we have a lot more of social guaranteeing before we get into economic guaranteeing. You guarantee somebody because probably you know them, probably because you are in a process together, probably because you are working together, or you belong to an association. In this house, we guarantee each other without even caring to know whether somebody has got shares or not. I want to say that those who guarantee, in most cases, Honorable Speaker, need to be a lot more protected because they may not even know that they may not be very keen to ascertain that this person has abilities to pay. So there is need for us to protect the guarantors so that the first charged must be able to pay. The institutions that are lending must be able to ascertain that there is possibility for the first charge to pay. Honorable Speaker, I would also like to highlight the fact that we need to protect we need to protect the property owners. Many people have lost their properties because of guaranteeing, and it is in very good faith that they guarantee. Therefore, the law comes in to put that safeguard in order to be able to enable us to guarantee each other to do business. When you look at the circles or savings and credit organizations, in all cases, in almost all cases, they normally rely on guarantees. You have to be guaranteed by 2 or 3 people before you can get a loan. Honorable Speaker, we have cases of people who are paying loans for others over a long time, because what happens is that if they are not able to pay, then the bank or the lender basically turns to the guarantors to pay. In this particular case, Honorable Speaker, I believe this amendment is going to secure the guarantors in the sense that the first charged should be able to exclusively purpose to pay and put all the efforts in terms of paying so that they can be able to redeem the money that they have borrowed from an institution. Honorable Speaker, the issue of interest rates has come up once so often in the conversations in this House. I would like to add my voice to the fact that although we have interest rate capping, we've never seen banks going at a loss, which means banks who are making supernormal profits out of the very poor Kenyans. The idea of having interest capping is important so that we may not go the direction of impoverizing Kenyans at the expense of enriching a few banks. Honorable Speaker, it is important for us to open the economy through guaranteeing, and it is only through protection of the guarantors that we can be able to open up this economy. Kenya is not creating as many businesses as it ought to do. We are not creating as much employment as we ought to do. We need to put in a lot more money in terms of
giving out the money. The person giving out the money, whether a bank, and I want our understanding to go beyond banks and go to the levels of other financial institutions, including the current many mobile Shylocks who have different names like Faliza and others. Because soon or later, they shall start attaching the properties of the people that are given as guarantors. Because before I hear you join a Faliza, you give some names, and honorable members, you'll see one time or another, you getting a message that you guaranteed either your worker or somebody you know or your constituent, and possibly they would want to attach your property. So when you look at the mindset of the person giving out the money in that broad understanding, then you will see that the people giving out money, whether banks or Falizas, are capital owners. And the background of a capital owner is to make profit. So the driving force of the institution giving out money is profit and nothing else. And if you want just to juggle your mind, look at the old people who borrowed, want to refer briefly to Shakespeare's writing, The Merchant of Venice. They go to an extent of believing you can take a price of meat from the heart of the person who owes him money because they need their profit. Now, that is the main reason why the guarantor must be protected. Because given that the spirit of the person giving out the money, the financial institution, is to make profits, then for him, he'll be randy and he'll go for any property without understanding that we should go for the principal borrower first before we go to the guarantors. Because he wants to make profit out of it. He's not honest. He's a profit maker. He's a capitalist. And therefore, this law has never come at the correct time than now, when Kenya is facing a mirage of borrowing online, a mirage of borrowing that has not been paid by government in the form of pending bills, and a mirage of many mushrooming financial institutions. One such a financial institution like the Kenya Women, think about it, honorable members, has been very harsh in the villages whenever they give out money to women. And they finally get more than even they gave out as a loan, because they attach all the guarantors, sell their property, whether they are animals, houses. They even go to the extent of breaking down houses and taking the mabati or the iron sheets on the houses and selling them. It's an orgy, Honorable Speaker. It's a wild party that I think the Honorable Member has come on time to bring to a stop, and therefore I confidently and strongly support this law. Thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Member, did you quote the, is it Venice?
End of Venice.
Yeah, that quote was pretty deep, actually, and very contextual to the matter we are dealing with. But that aside, before I give to the next speaker, allow me to introduce yet other schools that have come. At the Speaker's Gallery, we have Asubi Girls High School, Homa Bay County Language Constituency. We also have, still at the Speaker's Gallery, Chelsea Academy from Bomet Central Constituency, Bomet County. At the Public Gallery, we have Moroka Secondary School from Muranga County, Kadala Constituency. We also have at the Public Gallery, ACK, St. Joseph's Kabete, Westerns Constituency, Nairobi County. All those schools are welcome to follow the proceedings of the National Assembly. Shall we have now to my right, top on the list is Honorable Kimani Kuria.
I thank you, Mr. Speaker, and from the onset, I would like to congratulate Honorable Francis Waitito on this amendment to the contract bill, because, Mr. Speaker, a lot of Kenyans out there have suffered as a result of their hard-earned money, as a result of their savings being deducted by banks, by financial institutions, because they guarantee them, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to discuss this further from an accounting point of view, Mr. Speaker. International Financial Reporting Standards, IFRS number 8 by the International Accounting Standards Board, clearly illustrates that banks must realize what's called the expected credit loss in their financial statements, Mr. Speaker. But last financial year, a lot of banks reported high and increased profits. But on further investigation, Mr. Speaker, I would say that this is mainly because central bank allowed these banks not to use this IFRS number 9, and instead of charging expected credit loss to the profit and loss account, they charge this to the balance sheet against the retained earnings, and therefore this profits mushroomed, Mr. Speaker. And therefore the banks, with that, Mr. Speaker, I will tell you, could not be telling us the truth in terms of the profit that they claim to be making. And their only refuge, Mr. Speaker, is that the reason why they're not performing, or they think they're not performing as well as they should, and the reason why they were able to convince central bank to relax this International Financial Reporting Standard number 9, so that this loss is not charged on their profit and loss, and instead charged on the balance sheet, and therefore increasing their profits on the profit and loss account. They attribute this to the interest rates capping that was done by Honorable Jude Jomo, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I find this rather unfortunate. The credit levels of this country, or the access to credit in this country, Mr. Speaker, has gone down as far as is concerned the access of this credit from the financial banks, Mr. Speaker. But on the contrary, we have seen mushrooming applications, borrowing from mobile money. And, Mr. Speaker, some of these interest rates from these mobile money applications are as high as 180%. So how come there is actually a market and a demand for loans at 180% per annum, to be repaid within 1 week, within 2 weeks, within a month. And there is no same demand from our banks, Mr. Speaker. It is because our banks have taken a simple route, and a simple route of only lending to what they're calling secured lenders. If you have a payslip, if you have property, Mr. Speaker, and nowadays, even if when you have immovable property, for example, land, they're not even lending to, on security of land. They want a security of a new motor vehicle or something that they know if in case of default, they come and take it, Mr. Speaker. And not just that. The issue of guarantors. If, for example, I have guaranteed an honorable member of this house for a loan, and that honorable member defaults, instead of coming to seek that money from me first, and that is what our honorable member here wants to cure, why should the bank not make an effort to reach out to that member, to reach out to the employer, and deduct that money from the employer, or claim or take that contract to the loanee and tell them and go to the employer and say, this loanee has this amount of money that they are owed to us and they have refused to pay, before now going to deduct this money from the guarantors, Mr. Speaker. And it's because they have an easier way out. I'll be very, I'm waiting to see what the finance bill will come and how government is lending in terms of external lending as opposed to internal lending, Mr. Speaker, internal borrowing, Mr. Speaker, because the banks have realized that they don't need to work hard. They can just sell treasury bills and treasury bonds to the government at a rate that is and you realize with T-bills and bonds, the risk is zero. They are risk-free, that is. And therefore, instead of going to that SME, to that young person, to that person who has an idea for a business financing idea and borrowing to them, because the risk is higher, they end up only lending this to government, do the treasury bills and treasury bonds, Mr. Speaker. But most importantly, the banks in this country needs to get patriotic. And get patriotic and not just do business to make money, but do business to spur economic growth of our republic, Mr. Speaker. There is no sense in the banks, like, for example, just lending to those people that have pay slips and those people that have security, and miss out on people who have great and brilliant ideas, Mr. Speaker, that could be funded and that could spur development growth, that could lead to increased employment of our people, and especially for the young people of this country. And most importantly, Mr. Speaker, it is said that if you do business to make money, you may not succeed as much as when you do business and make money. And this is my appeal to our banks. Let us not just do business to make money. Let us do business and make money. And if you do business to not just make money, but because you have the right intentions for people, Mr. Speaker, you will not find now these applications competing with you. It's very unfortunate that even some of the banks, in a way of now, the regulations here that we've passed at the National Assembly, in a way of bypassing them, they're now even creating their own mobile bank application loans. So that the bank, instead of lending it through the normal lending products that we know, they create a different company, incorporate a different company, give it, call it an app, whether it is Tara or Branch or Furiza or M-Trade or whatever, and now lend it to the public. For example, Mr. Speaker, M-Shwari is a product of Safaricom Bank and CBA Bank, Mr. Speaker. So we have a bank that is out there lending money at 180% per annum, which is contrary to laws that have been passed in this house. But if you want to go after them, you can't, because they are not directly them lending, but they are lending through other people, Mr. Speaker. That being said and done, it's very unfortunate that our young people, our women, our business people have been auctioned. Not because they took that money to benefit themselves and to do business, but because they innocently signed a form. And you see, it's innocently just signing a form. And most of these people, you know, those bank loan forms come with terms and conditions apply. And those terms and conditions and pages and pages and pages. So you obviously cannot even read them. In fact, even some of the time, on the loan that you sign, they do not tell you what the loans, what the terms and conditions are. They tell you that the terms and conditions are available on their website. So you just tick there to show that you have verified and you agree with the terms and conditions that are not even attached in the form that you're signing, Mr. Speaker. And just by assigning that simple signature, we have people who have lost their lives, who have lost a lot of money. And Mr. Speaker, this amendment cannot come more timely, and I'm hoping that these regulations to our banks will tell them that it's the right time they woke up and realize that Kenyans have become wiser and there is a better way of doing business. And they can actually do good business, mean good for our country, and still make money for themselves, for the better of our economy and for the better of the tomorrow of our children. And those remarks, I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well. To my left, then light first, the Honorable Wanyonyi Kevin.
At long last, Mr. Speaker, thank you for the opportunity. I've been waiting, but I want to take this opportunity again to thank Honorable Waititu for coming up with this amendment of law and contract. It's very realistic. Mr. Speaker, this is the most realistic amendment that we've had in this House. First and foremost, we know Kenyans today, we have almost 16.9 million Kenyans who have no jobs. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, all that we need to do is that you don't have to sit and wait, is to do something. Therefore, most people are actually having ideas of starting business. And I want to say those who want to do that are good enough because it's as good as getting a job. And therefore, I think I want to take this caution to the creditors that before the creditors actually give out the money and they do, particularly the banks, Sherlock's, what have you, know who is borrowing. Because the reality is that people are becoming very smart. He comes to you and convinces you he wants to do this and that and that. And because you know that he's not employed and is able to do what he's saying, then of course the banks or whatever the financial institutions are, they give out the money. At the end of the day, these money is unable to pay. And what happens? Sorry cases. If cases where people have lost title deeds, and this has been said by many members of the parliament here. And you know what happens? Even families break up. Honorable Chris Omola mentioned that, and I quite agree with him. We've got cases where people borrow to travel overseas with endless borrowing. And then, of course, you ended up having families breaking up. And therefore, I think as we go to pass this amendment, we should go deeper and be able to have that if one has to borrow and it comes to you, include your spouses, those guaranteeing people to borrow, the spouses being involved, families should be able to be involved, and they know whoever is borrowing, because at the end of the day, he borrows and disappears. What happens? The burden is left to you. We have had cases like that. I personally have been a victim of this. I've lost 3 vehicles. One vehicle was sold because I guaranteed a guy who was smarter than me. And I thought I was just going to be being a man of the people, being a leader in my own constitutions and what have you. I gave out money. And the guy disappeared. I can't find him. And that is exactly what is happening today. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I have the idea that we should do that because we should not stop giving out or guaranteeing people who want to start business. But I think we should be able to understand them. The banks should be able to understand who is giving the money for, and so that we have people who are disciplined. I think the other thing, Mr. Speaker, and this is not general, Kenyans must be disciplined. We are not disciplined. That is the biggest problem, because you find somebody's borrowing, and he's borrowing for, as I said, you must borrow for a good purpose. If I have to borrow, I did some business before I came to this house. I was a businessman, and I borrowed to start business. And that business should be able to have, I think, a balance sheet to be able to know whether that business is going to give you back the returns. But people who are not disciplined will just borrow money for the sake of it. And therefore, as we go further, Mr. Speaker, let's also look at the realistic part of it, down, so that people, also Kenyans, must be disciplined. Some people actually are tricksters. They trick you, and they disappear with whatever. So I want to ask Kenyans that please, when you go to the bank or any financial institution or go to your friend to borrow money for a good purpose, borrow money to be able to do something that can be able to give you better returns. And I think, again, as I said, and I want to repeat myself here and to emphasize that please the creditors should also be smarter. Don't take it for granted. And sometimes people actually come together and they want to default you because some of it is actually they borrow and they come to you, not for the good reason, but they're coming to you because he's jealous of what you have and one way of making you get punished for it. And therefore, I think let's be careful. I want to thank once again Honorable Waititu for having come with this a very realistic amendment on this bill, and we support that. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
Before I give to the next speaker, I want to recognize yet other additional schools that have come at the public gallery. We have Kerogoya Good Shepherd Academy from Kirinyaga Central Constituency, Kirinyaga County. We also have Aitong Boarding Primary School from Narok West Constituency, Narok County. Both schools are yet again welcome to watch the proceedings of the National Assembly. Shall we have Honorable Jennifer?
Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Harris, don't be anxious. You still get a chance for sure. And the other members. So don't, you all still get a chance. Honorable Jennifer.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I arise to support this bill and take this opportunity to congratulate Honorable Waititu on the Law of Contract Amendment Bill. Honorable Speaker, it is an assumption that lenders exercise due diligence and control in lending and in realization of debts from principal debtors. It is the guarantor's obligation, it is noted that the guarantor's obligation is actually secondary and not primary. It has begun to appear that for these lending institutions, the assets or collateral of the guarantors appears more attractive to the lender than that of the principal borrower. Going forward, and in short, it is my considered opinion that the relevant committees of this House do undertake an audit of these financial systems lenders and the court cases that have filed with regards to lenders engaging in inequitable and fraudulent conduct. Indeed, we must know and have an audit of this going forward, and so that we can take the necessary action on that. And because I state this because when one reads The Merchant of Venice, more specifically in part 4, scene 1, Portia insists to Shylock, the money lender, because her husband, I think Antonio, owes money, and she says, yes, you can take a pound of flesh, but not a drop of blood. What has happened with the institutions in this country, they are taking not only the pound of flesh, but the blood of the guarantors. And it is for that reason I do implore that the relevant committees do investigate and do an audit on these particular lenders. And with those few remarks, I want to say that I do support Honorable Waititu wholeheartedly with regards to this amendment.
Honorable Baya, yeah.
Yes, Honorable Speaker, thank you very much. I want to contribute and support this motion, this bill by Honorable Waititu by saying that, one, to congratulate him for good thought, that he's able to think about this his legislative role to want to protect the common person. Again, I want to say that this law is a good piece of legislation. Looking at it, it's going to safeguard our people. Mr. Speaker, people who guarantee loans to people have been left with sleepless nights. Why? Because at the time when the hammer falls and this guy has not made any payment, then they follow the guarantor, and therefore he loses money and assets. And like has been said before, families actually have been left suffering because one person took a loan, ran away, and they have to pay that loan. Now that we are changing the law, that the first call should be the person who took the money, the premium. The first person, the principal who took the money should be followed. Mr. Speaker, so this is going to help. One, a lot of young people today want to have businesses, startups, the only place they can go is to either a bank, a cooperative, or a financial institution, so that they can get their money, go into business, and realize their dream. But when they're told they have to get guarantors for them to be able to get the money, what happens is every person they follow, they say, you know, you're not credit worth. I cannot guarantee you. I cannot guarantee you because you are not credit worth. So at the end of the day, this young person's dream to go into business flounders on the way. And therefore, he cannot go or she cannot go into a business. But if we make it easier, that if I guarantee a person, a young man who wants to start a business, I will not be followed to be said I must pay that loan. Therefore, I'll be more comfortable to say, yes, I'll guarantee you so that you follow. Secondly, what this law does, Mr. Speaker, is it gives confidence and responsibility to people who borrow, so that they do not push the responsibility of the loan to the other person. Because if I have borrowed and I know I don't have any backup, then I'll work hard and use the money very well so that I can pay. But the moment I know if I default in payment, someone else will pay for me, then I will relax. I will take my time and not be able to work hard. I will squander the money and say, actually, I don't have anything to pay because actually I don't have any asset, and therefore the person who guaranteed must pay. Follow that person. And this has happened to many women who borrow. And like my friend Omboko Milemba singled out Kenya Women Finance Trust. Many women borrow at Kenya Women Finance Trust. And when they borrow, they are told, please give us your guarantor. So you give a list, and they go to the guarantors and check in their homes what they have, and they list down all their assets. And then this lady is given money. They go and misuse the money or use it not for business purposes. Sometimes they even use it to pay school fees and other things. But when they're confronted with paying, they say, but you know, I have guarantors whose assets you also listed, and therefore follow them, not me. Now what happens? Institutions like Kenya Women Finance Trust now are losing business. Why? Because people know every time I'm guaranteed a loan, the person who guaranteed me will have to pay. And therefore some of these people do not take a loan responsibility seriously because they know they have somebody backing them. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, this law that is coming in, and thanks to my friend Waititu, is going to help and make people more responsible when they take credit facilities for business, and therefore will use them. Now, in the same way, the economy of this country will grow. The GDP of the small areas that people borrow from will grow because money will be put into good use. But if I know that I have somebody who will back me up and I will not put the money in good use. And when the money is not put in good use, the economy of the place does not grow. So if it is invested, if I take a loan and invest in agriculture, the productivity of that area will benefit from that loan, and therefore the economy of that place will grow. So, Mr. Speaker, as I continue to support what my brother Waitutu has said, I would like to say this. There has been, in this country, families who have been very unhappy, but a stroke of a pen, the decision of a father that he took to say, you know, this guy is my friend, I know him, and he guarantees him. And he is happy that he's helping a friend. But woe unto him, because this person will not take greater responsibility on the facility and squanders. And then the torch comes back to spotlight the family. And the spouses have even split. Children have blamed their father. Why? Because they guaranteed someone. I have a case in my constituency where a father gladly gives a title deed and says, you see, I'm guaranteeing my friend. He's my friend. He needs money, so I'm using my title deed to guarantee this person. This person takes the money, does whatever he does, he gets nothing out of it, and the bank comes calling. So what happens? This farm has to be sold. And they ran back to their member of parliament and say, you know, you need to help us on this. Why? This person knew that, you know, there's a title deed. My 14 million I've taken from the bank, I know it's guaranteed by so-and-so's title deed. So I can do whatever I want with the money. This will stop with this kind of law, that the first call for payment of a loan whether default or not, is the assets of the person who borrowed and not the person who guaranteed. We are going to safeguard families, we are going to safeguard the economy, and we are going to see prosperity because people will have more responsibility when handling money that has been borrowed from financial institutions. Mr. Speaker, I support and I hope this this amendment bill goes through as fast as possible so that the President can assent to this and it becomes law. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Wanyonyi, member for Westland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me a chance also to contribute to this amendment bill. Mr. Speaker, I think the object of this bill is to cure the ambiguity in the law so that business can operate in a predictable and a secure environment. Mr. Speaker, many times, as my colleagues who have spoken earlier than me have alluded, people borrow with good intentions. And those who guarantee them, they do it because they know the borrower, they know he's a friend, is somebody that they're very sure when they're pending their signature to that document. But Mr. Speaker, as the amendment reads, I think the primary objective of the lender, the financial institution, should be to deal with the principal borrower, not take shortcuts to go for the Karanda. Karanda is just there to secure, to make sure that the person borrowing actually is provided with some security, which should not be the excuse for the financial institution in the end to harass him. Mr. Speaker, there are many times we have seen now Kenyans are being fleeced by online borrowing. And this online borrowing, Mr. Speaker, is coming very easy, that before somebody knows is borrowing money that he has it doesn't have any use for it. And then that ended up in this credit bureau, Mr. Speaker, where they are being now listed as creditors who have defaulted in paying debts, and yet they are not really to blame. So we are here, Mr. Speaker, to make sure that business is not operating as a punitive to people who want to help others secure credit facilities, but that those who have secured credit facilities are, the financial institution must make sure that they know they collect the right information about the borrower and know very well that the borrower, they must go to the extra length to make sure that the borrower who has defaulted must be the one to be brought to book, not the Karanda. But this, Mr. Speaker, because it's going to make Karandas to be secure, that when I guarantee somebody, I'm not going to be auctioned, or the law is not going to bend the other side and leave the principal borrower who will be walking around free, and you are being, Mr. Speaker, taken away. We also want to secure Kenyans because I think we need to come up with very good legislation to protect Kenyans from this online borrowing, because it is enticing and it's just, they prop you up with a message and tell you qualify for this or qualify for that. Before you know what you are doing, Mr. Speaker, you are already engaged yourself and you have borrowed money, and that money, these people, they'll not warn you, they just come for you. And sometimes we have seen even people borrowing and guaranteed by institutions like companies, and the borrower ignores those, the principal borrower, and starts going in for the other, Mr. Speaker, like rating even the accounts of the Karanda if you hold an account within the same institution. So before you know that, and then they'll tell you, if you don't, then produce the other person. And I don't think that's what the law was all about. That was not the wisdom of the people who crafted this law. So for us to cure the ambiguity, Mr. Speaker, this amendment is very important, that we must remove the ambiguity in the law, and we must also, the mischief that is there that has been exploited. As Honorable Milembas expressed about the merchants of Venice, you see when somebody comes around and wants a pound of flesh,
the closest to your heart, and Mr. Speaker, and you are pleading innocent, it is very difficult for you to come out of that situation because you signed a consent which you signed freely. And sometimes they fail to warn the Karanda because there's always a clause that warns about the consequences. So before he appends the signature, the person who is dealing with those documents, Mr. Speaker, if he's a lawyer, is supposed to warn, is supposed to show him that clause that gives warns about the consequences for him standing as a Karanda. So we need, Mr. Speaker, to cure this amendment, this ambiguity, and then bring the law to be more predictable and also protect those who are borrowing and who want to do business, Mr. Speaker. The business environment wants to operate in a secure environment where whatever you are doing, Mr. Speaker, has got some predictability. But if it's not, then you will be doing something that is not legally viable. So, Mr. Speaker, I support this amendment, and I believe that once this is done, it will cure the mischief that is in the law. Mr. Speaker, thank you very much.
The Honorable Wanyonyi, in the Merchant of Venice, the lender extract his exact pound, nothing less, nothing more. Could he do it? But anyway, that is very nice. The Honorable Alice Wahome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity to speak to this Law of Contract Amendment Bill by the Honorable Francis Waitito. Mr. Speaker, I want to confess that Mr. Waitito has been in a conversation with me to support his bill. And indeed, I am a member of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee, the Vice Chair, where he came to the committee and prosecuted his bill, his amendment proposal very well. And he expressed a lot of concern, Mr. Speaker, for the borrowers that have been borrowing and also using guarantors to support their security. Mr. Speaker, I think the essence of this bill has been spoken to by most members who have spoken. The concern of the mover of this amendment is that whereas the principal borrower or the borrower, being described as the principal borrower, takes a security, takes a loan, gives a security, commits to pay the loan, but also is asked to support by further guaranteeing the loan or additional security by a guarantor, then the borrower has the responsibility to pay. But it has occurred many times that most of the guarantors are actually either the wife, the son or the daughter, a family member, a father, or a close friend of the borrower. And you know, because there is a security that initially was to guarantee this loan, many times you'll find that even the wife who has given guarantee to this loan is basically not very well advised because she's actually agreeing to the request by her husband. And thereafter, information regarding the payment, maybe the address is the same, the person who receives the reminders for the loan could be the same borrower, and that even the address that was given in terms of communication is that of the main borrower. Therefore, many times the guarantors have been sought for to pay to meet the commitment without previous knowledge of the record of repayment and without very prior notice of the default. And therefore, they have lost their properties, they have lost their homes, not because possibly they could have contributed to push for repayment. Indeed, I don't think it's the business of any bank to actually sell homes, to sell the securities. It's for them to support the borrower, but also realize, ensure that repayment is done. But I think also the banks must apply extra means to ensure that the borrower lives to the commitment. it has obviously, therefore, and I think as a lawyer, I'm aware that many guarantors have suffered. They have been visited with the default by the borrower and have been forced to repay on behalf of the borrower. And I think that's where the banks have a responsibility to actually engage the guarantor in better ways than going to sell their properties. And therefore, I think the idea processed in this bill by the Honorable Waitito is really to secure the loan in the first instance so that the principal borrower commits and completes his commitment, repays, but also that the guarantor is not made to pay where actually there is no proper due diligence, there is no exhaustion of the security of the principal borrower. Indeed, many times, even the borrower, Mr. Speaker, has given their own further personal guarantees. And therefore, before you reach the borrower, the guarantor, have you exhausted all the securities, all the means of the borrower? And it has many times been found that the banks react very quickly and require the guarantor, to actually meet the responsibility of the borrower. And I think also looking at the whole setup, that the banking industry really has a responsibility to assist the borrower, the guarantors, in paying other than resorting to selling the homes or the securities that have been kept. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying here is that I would like to support Francis Waitito. He has worked very hard. He has visited the committee not once, not twice, and sought the support of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. Indeed, he wanted to even know whether legally what he's proposing is viable, and I was very sure that I have seen people suffering because of the law having a gap, that the first default or the second, then they rush to liquidate the security of the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, and I think up to now, the banks seem to be also complaining about the capping of the interest rate. Before that was done, Mr. Speaker, you will know that Kenyans, ordinary Kenyans, have suffered. The borrowing in this country, money is very expensive. Business money is not affordable. Banking industry is not always accessible. Women themselves have suffered. They do not have securities that they can provide. So the little securities that are homes where the wives are holding the securities, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to support this because I see a situation where the responsibility lies with the borrower and the bank, not largely the guarantor, and therefore I stand to support the Honorable Francis Waitito and say that, yes, it is a good bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Alice Wahome, you must be aware that the banks are making attempts to unravel the caps that you placed on them. And when the time is right, it will come before this House. I wish to recognize in the presence of the following school in the public gallery: St. Joseph Girls High School from Voi constituency, Taita Taveta County. They are welcome to observe the proceedings of their National Assembly. I will give this opportunity to the Honorable Mwamkale Kamoti, member for Abai.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I would first and foremost thank my friend, Honorable Waitito, for this good amendment that is overdue to the Kenyan people. Mr. Speaker, this amendment will go a long way to cure the lacuna that has been in this law of contracts, where banks and lending institutions have been going for anybody who is on the list of guarantors to offset what really should be paid by the borrower. Mr. Speaker, Kenya is a society where people have all the faith in friends, colleagues, and they are therefore guarantee people out of good faith. Really, we know the people that we are guaranteeing, but what has been happening is you guarantee somebody not knowing that sometimes you are getting into a collusion of some sorts. I'm saying this, Mr. Speaker, because I myself has been a victim of such a racket. I did guarantee a colleague in the LSK circle, and after I had appended my signatures, this colleague never paid, and I lost all my shares in that circle. So, Mr. Speaker, this law will go out to cure. The guarantors should be the last people to be touched in such a transaction. Indeed, when one is taking a loan, be it from KWFT, be it from a bank, they give collaterals. They give what they own. And for us who are guaranteeing these people, we know them. So the banks, before coming to a guarantor, should involve the guarantor in pursuing this borrower before they get to the guarantor. But what has been happening is people collude, and before you say Jack, you see auctioneers in front of the house of the guarantor, taking everything and antagonizing the family members of this guarantor who did it in good faith without even blinking. As it has been mentioned, Mr. Speaker, here in Parliament, we even don't turn the other page of that form when we are guaranteeing our colleagues for the circle loan. You are just shown where to sign. You sign, not even knowing how much your colleague is taking. And we are doing this in good faith. But this has been abused, and that's why today everybody who is rising is congratulating Honorable Waititu, because in the event of anything, we know our colleagues, we know they are capable of paying, and if contacted, the guarantor, if given a not good notice and involved, the guarantor will be able to show the financial institution, be it a SACCO or whatever, on what to recover from the borrower before it gets to him. So, Mr. Speaker, I do support this, and I believe that from the mood of the House, this is a bill that this amendment will sail through, and Kenyans are waiting to be saved by this. Thank you, Honorable Waititu, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. Thanks.
Very well. The Honorable Lisa Chepkorir, member for Nakuru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, for giving me this opportunity to also support the proposed amendment to the Law of Contract Act by Mheshimiwa for Juja Sub-County. Mr. Speaker, this morning we are discussing a very important amendment, and this is about the interest of protecting the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, under normal circumstances, guarantors and borrowers are doing these things not because in bad faith or any. They don't normally take it as a bad decision. When you are guaranteeing somebody for the purpose of economic growth at the family level and maybe at any other level. But at some point, there's those challenges that forces the principal borrower not to pay back the loan or to default. And the reason why I am supporting this bill, Mr. Speaker, sir, is because so many guarantors, innocent guarantors, very good people have been suffering because of this. And there is one issue, Mr. Speaker, sir, the sensitization about the guarantee, the purpose of guarantee. Most guarantors have been doing this innocently. They don't know why they are signing. They don't know why they are made to do so. They are doing this in good faith because most of them have been guarantors of relatives and friends. And they actually don't know the consequence that they suffer later. So there is need to even educate the guarantors. So today, we are coming up with a bill that is going to protect the interest of a guarantor. And this is a good initiative by the Mheshimiwa Fojuja. I really want to congratulate him. I'm here to stand. Most of us, you know, today, Mr. Speaker, sir, you could be a guarantor to a certain borrower. And then maybe tomorrow, again, you become a borrower who, of course, you will also need somebody to guarantee for you. So this tells me that the central bank should actually come up with good regulations that will take into consideration the interest of the borrower, the principal borrower, and the principal guarantor. This is about regulations. I don't think it is about the mistake of anybody between the borrower and the guarantor. So the central bank should come up with good regulations that are so friendly and good regulations that will take into the interest for both the borrower, the principal borrower, and the guarantor. Mr. Speaker, sir, in most cases, banks have always been going direct to the guarantor without even exhausting the principal borrower. And for reasons not known to many people, we don't know why the banks are actually making the guarantor suffer for nothing. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, it's a concern that central bank should come up with regulations that will protect both the borrower and the guarantor. With those few remarks, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support this bill. Thank you.
Very well. The Honorable Luyaya Misi, member for Saboti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I've been patiently waiting for this chance to also voice my support to this very timely bill. Mr. Speaker, some of these laws that guide our financial institutions were heavily borrowed from other jurisdictions. And as much as I've worked elsewhere, our cultural and social setup is quite different. And Mr. Speaker, you can see the mushrooming of banks around this country. The banks have found it an easier way of making profit out of some of these laws that cushion them against risk of lending. And it's why this bill is timely, this point where most Kenyans have suffered out of guaranteed their friends. Our cultural setup is in a way that we are a friendly, harmonious society where we mind of each other. And some of us guarantee friends just out of courtesy. Someone is in distress and has called upon you to get some quick money, whether it is for business or otherwise. But whether even it's for business, our economy status does not really guarantee a return on investment. So the whole lending process has faced a myriad of problems, and it is a high time we look at our laws, not just this one, but entirely, even in our own constitution. Remember, we have in this imbroglio between our Senate and our National Assembly because of the laws that were just literally airlifted from elsewhere. And it is time we start now assessing our own laws that guide our financial institutions, whether there are, they are possible within our cultural, social, and economic setup. Mr. Speaker, there is even a case in point where a friend guaranteed a person who was vying for a seat. And of course, he lost the seat. The person died, mostly because of the shock of losing the seat. And even the person who guaranteed him to get a loan for the resources he used for campaign, he also died, maybe out of shock that now he's going to lose the entire investments. So here we are a case of losing an individual innocently that came up to help, a person who does not even get interested in politics in the first place, but is suffering because he came out innocently to help a person whom we didn't even understand is taking the money to politics. And our politics is a risk in itself. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that is going to cushion most of innocent Kenyans who have been guaranteed friends out of courtesy, goodwill, and eventually lose their properties and they leave their family languishing in poverty and even causing deaths, like in the case that I've pointed out. And you can actually ask yourself, why are we having so many banks in a population of 45 million Kenyans? We have about 50 banks. So that one, empirically, it shows that every 1 million Kenyans, there is one bank. It's because the banks have found it, palatable to just give loans, knowing very well they are cushioned against risk. They use this guarantee as a way of cushioning. And that's why they are making, if you look at all the financial statements of most banks in this country, their profit emanates from borrowed interest on borrowed money. So that shows that, of course, the banks are not going to be happy with some of this legislation, but it's for the good of the country, and it's for the good of everybody, and we must regulate our financial institutions against the innocent borrowers, innocent Kenyans who go on losing instead of making profit and making money out of their investments. They end up losing, and we have so many cases of that nature, Mr. Speaker. This is a timely bill, and I congratulate the member, Honorable Waititu, for coming up with this important bill. I do support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Mose John, member for Kitutu.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, sir, for giving me a chance to also add my voice to this very, very important amendment. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, sir, we want to congratulate my colleague, Mr. Waititu, Honorable Waititu, for actually coming up with this very timely amendment to the law of contract. First and foremost, Mr. Speaker, sir, what is evident is that when borrowers borrow money, they borrow on the understanding that they are going to make good use of the money. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, many of the borrowers borrow money without first and foremost having in mind a good business model in place to enable them, do that business. And as a consequence of that, and having been guaranteed, the banks, who are always interested in making business, are normally interested in ensuring that they make quick returns or quick gains from the guarantors. This particularly, therefore, leaves the guarantors in a very vulnerable position. Mr. Speaker, it is my contribution that first and foremost, actually the guarantors themselves should be cautioned when they are guaranteeing borrowers. Why do I say this? Because in many cases, we have scenarios where a guarantor guarantees a borrower without first of all knowing what the purpose of that borrowing is. They also go ahead, Mr. Speaker, to guarantee without even knowing the amount of money that is guaranteed. Therefore, it is also a cautionary advice that we should, as guarantors, we should ensure that the Kenyan guarantors also do not actually guarantee borrowers without knowing what their essence of guaranteeing is. But nonetheless, Mr. Speaker, it is always important and critical that the principal borrower who has given a security, who has given a collateral, that security or a collateral be realized in the first instance. Many of them are very cunning. Many of them are people who borrow with an intention of not even repaying, and therefore immediately they have borrowed and they have been given money, they move to the next level of even hiding some of their properties. And therefore this amendment is extremely timely to the extent that we should be able to pursue the principal borrower fully, ensure that if they have any other properties, we realize those properties. Then secondly, we also should pursue them to ensure that we even commit them to civil jail before we move to the next level of calling for the guarantors to be able to now respond to their onerous duty of guaranteeing. None of this, neither the borrower nor the guarantor, should be left loose. I see something that interests me, Honorable Speaker, that in many occasions, people are very quick to append their signatures to documents that they don't even know what the content of that document is. And it really goes against even the rule of law that ignorantia juris non excusat. Honorable Speaker, it is always important that before you append your signature, you should be able to know what the reasons that you are appending your signature. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, what I am saying is that we should not be able to let out of the hook the principal borrower. The principal borrower should be made to carry his own cross before we are able to move to the next level. Therefore, with those remarks, Honorable Speaker, I move to support this motion, this amendment, and I also add that where we are legislating, I am sure we are developing our law, and it's very clear in our minds that the law is dynamic. Therefore, we'll continue to develop it as times call for it. Because I also know for a fact that there are those who have suffered innocently because of the cunning nature of the borrowers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Mose, ignorance of the law can never be an excuse. You are absolutely right. And we assign documents without reading them. We have admitted as such.
You should be able to know that you are supposed to meet your part of bargain to pay up. As much as we want to protect the guarantors, we should not do it in a way that we are going to affect the financial institution. Because many people will hold on their money. They may not be able to lend to the people because of that fear of the guarantor. But what is important here is because our people who borrow and the guarantors have lacked what we call financial discipline, an ability to pay what you have been given. Two, Mr. Speaker, banks also have a responsibility, or lenders have a responsibility, to educate the borrowers on the prudent financial or investment options when they are borrowing the money. The banks or the lenders must also make a follow-up between or within the contractual period before they start chasing the borrowers or the guarantors. Lastly, Mr. Speaker, we must also have a safeguard when we are legislating and doing this amendment. Who will guarantee, for example, if we say there will be no guarantee and the banks insist of having a guarantor, who will do this? To me, Mr. Speaker, it's the responsibility of the government now of the Republic of Kenya to come up, and maybe I'll be proposing some additional to this amendment, if I'm allowed, that maybe for the people who are within the brackets of the youth and wants to borrow from the banks, the government of Kenya must be ready to guarantee any loan that is being maybe asked by Kenyans. And in fact, when there is a default, let the government, because it has failed to provide employment opportunities to this youth, if the youth fails to pay up, let the government pay up. Mr. Speaker, I support. Thank you.
The Honorable Tonui Kiprotich, member for Bomet Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity
to also make my contribution on this. I do support this amendment by Honorable Waititu, and I want to commend him for coming up with this amendment. The amendment in itself is straightforward because it's trying to protect the innocent guarantors from being exploited by banks. The banks should not be lazy. They need to, first of all, pursue the borrower before going ahead to harass the guarantors. I believe all of us normally are victims of this. We normally sign documents to guarantee our friends and such without even looking at the details. Now the banks get excited with that. Once they see our signatures guaranteeing, they don't go to verify more. So the first issue which should happen is for the banks and the circles to follow up on the follow-up first before going for the resources of the guarantors. Let them exhaust the resources of the borrowers, if it is land, whatever they liquidate, before going after the guarantors. This amendment is quite welcome. But at the same time, the guarantors also need to be warned. They should be aware of what they are doing, what they are pending their signatures on. They should not be signing blindly. They need to know the creditworthiness of the people they are guaranteeing. Because many people these days wants to get rich too quick. I believe we are in the gambling generation. We want to have shortcut. We are ever looking for money and want to live the life which we cannot even afford. And therefore, we even borrow, we do what to bet and to do such. And I think we are also unfair as Parliament that we have also allowed some certain laws which are quite unfair to the public. Like this was on betting and such, which allows lots of borrowing through M-Swari, and nearly every youth these days, they are in credit reference bureaus. Because we adjusted that from 30%, 50% tax on gambling and betting to 15%, possibly because of fettered interest in both the executive and in this house, because we stand to be blamed, although the executive stands to be blamed more, because that adjustment was made by the executive through this house, which failed to get the 50%, the two-thirds majority to override it. Then there is also this issue of people who are living flash lifestyles. I believe our people need to be made aware of these fellows who are living flash lifestyle, fake millionaires, which we are running around even in choppers. You know, you can easily guarantee them because they look like they have lots of money. They have lots of resources. Once you have guaranteed them, you discover that they are phony, they are fake, that they don't have those money, which they seem to show off everywhere, that they are not creditworthy. The issue also of assessing the creditworthiness of the borrowers needs to be re-emphasized. The banks should not simply be flashing around their money and targeting the guarantors without, first of all, assessing quite well the creditworthiness of their borrowers or their creditors. And also the government should come in to assist in accessing credit, cheaper credit, because what we have in this country is very expensive credit. We understand outside there, like in countries like Japan, for one to deposit money in the bank, they have to pay the bank. The interest rates there are less than 5%. Is there no way the government guarantee the banks which we have, especially the government banks, the SACCOs, to borrow directly from those banks cheaply and be able to lend to us so that we can have cheaper credit? Because in the current economic situation in this country, if you go to a bank and borrow money and you are honest, you go and open a shop trying to do business, surely you will never repay that loan. Your property will surely be sold. It is only the people who have shortcuts, those people who are connected with the people in government, both in the national government and in the county government, who are getting government tenders, who are able to repay loans. But those others who are trying to struggle outside there without anyone to push them, they cannot make profits more than 10%. And you know, at least interest rates alone is around 15%. The cost of employees, the cost of operations cannot be taken care of by that profit. And therefore, to repay it, it is next to impossible. So we need the government also to come in and look for cheaper options of accessing money from outside and enabling our banks to have that money, especially government banks and the SACCOs, so that they can lend to us cheaply, and that way we'll be able to do better to invest and develop ourselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I do support.
Very good. The Honorable Kwai Waluke, member for Sirisia.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for giving me also a chance to contribute on this important bill. Mr. Speaker, we are talking of the borrower and the guarantor. Both are important to the bank, the two people, Mr. Speaker, the guarantor and the borrower. Speakers have spoken here, Mr. Speaker, blaming the borrower mostly, maybe misusing money, and then at the end of the day, the guarantor is punished. His assets or properties are sold because he guaranteed the borrower, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sometimes you can have a problem. I can borrow money, and then tomorrow I get a problem. And if I have the money, I will use it to save, maybe I'm sick, I will use it to save my life. And my life is more important than the money that I borrowed. So, Mr. Speaker, the money is there to be used. And using money, Mr. Speaker, the way I have decided to borrow, nobody can blame me, saying that I borrowed money and I've misused it, maybe marrying a second wife or wives. Mr. Speaker, it is my business now to use the money as I've borrowed from the bank. So it is none of their business to blame, but the blame is for me if I default. And if I've defaulted in a way that I can understand myself, I can even talk to my borrower, Mr. Speaker, and my guarantor, and tell him that because of this problem, be careful that maybe if I default, I have alerted you. It is always good to alert your guarantor because you talked in good faith. He granted you in good faith, Mr. Speaker. But it is good for the two to talk. And also, what we need to talk about mostly, Mr. Speaker, sometimes is the interest rates of the banks. This is what this House needs to, even as we are talking, either we still bring it down. We thank Honorable Jomo for bringing it last time. But the interest, Mr. Speaker, is still high. It is about still 14% interest. So we need still to check what we passed in this House and what the banks are still charging on interest to their clients, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure they have not complied with the bill that we passed in this House, Mr. Speaker. So it is still high on the people, on the borrowers who borrow. And with the economy of this country, Mr. Speaker, now, without borrowing, banks are also not making, cannot make money. Although they made money before the bill came in, and they are still insisting on what they had before, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, because of time, and there are many who also wants to contribute on this, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honorable Waititu for bringing in this good bill, and we are going to pass it, Mr. Speaker. And I support
I support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Very well spoken, the Honorable Waluke. We shall now have the Honorable Mwangaza Kawira, member for Meru.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for this opportunity. I rise to support the bill. And first, I would say that this bill, Mr. Speaker, will make borrowers responsible enough to settle their loans knowing that they will be targets of their creditors. I come from a county, Mr. Speaker, where we have more than 15 banking institutions, and CBK having the third currency center in Meru. That shows the level of circulation of money in my county, that is Meru. We need to protect our people, Mr. Speaker, sir, from the lenders who go to take their properties, and also to protect every person who, after getting some amount from the lenders, they come along and seize everything that they have in name that the guarantors have not honored the promise to secure the loans. Mr. Speaker, sir, I would say that the lenders should be very responsible and very transparent to the customers and ensure that they understand all the terms and conditions before signing any agreement to borrow any amount of money. Mr. Speaker, sir, guarantors should also be protected from the lenders who, after seizing the collaterals, go further to demand extra assets in the name that they have not fully recovered what they have taken from them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I support the bill, and I urge this House to pass the bill so that our people will be protected. Thank you.
Very well. The Honorable Nyoro, member for Kiharu.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the chance to contribute to this bill. And from the onset, I support Honorable Waitito for these amendments to the law of contracts. Because, Mr. Speaker, as you know, when you borrow money in the bank and somebody guarantees you, the beneficiary of the money is not the guarantor. The beneficiary is always the borrower. And therefore, the bank has to stop on the person who enjoys the utility of those monies, Mr. Speaker, and that person is the borrower. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it is only reasonable that even before you go to take the property of the guarantor or the assets of the guarantor or the security, that you have to first exhaust all the avenues of making the person who enjoyed the utility, Mr. Speaker, to pay up the money, because that is the natural thing to do. Also, Mr. Speaker, even as we talk about borrowing, we have to be aware of the current scenario in our country, and actually the reason why defaulters or the defaulting list, Mr. Speaker, in our banks have gone up. Mr. Speaker, this is because of many reasons. First, as you know, Mr. Speaker, even the breadth of this matter. If you look at nowadays on the dailies, the major dailies, actually the best customers of our media houses currently, Mr. Speaker, are auctioneers. They are taking pages and pages of our newspapers, Mr. Speaker, and that is a clear show of how our financial market is, Mr. Speaker, and also basically how our economy is doing. Mr. Speaker, this is because of many reasons. One, of course, has been talked about by my colleagues, being the cost of borrowing. Our CBR rate, Mr. Speaker, is around currently 900 basis points, Mr. Speaker, or around 9%. But, Mr. Speaker, if you compare to some other countries that have much more efficient financial sectors, like the US, Mr. Speaker, the Federal Reserve rate currently is around 2.5%. If you go to a country like Japan, that has been quoted by my colleague here, Mr. Speaker, the CBR rate equivalent of Japan, Mr. Speaker, whereas ours is 9%, Japan is negative, Mr. Speaker. That when you borrow money, you actually added some more money. That is the bank lending rate, Mr. Speaker, from their central bank to the commercial banks. Mr. Speaker, therefore, even if we have capped our lending rates, our rates are still a bit high, Mr. Speaker. But also, there has been a fallacy in this country that the business people are not getting finances from our banks because of our capping regime of our lending rates, Mr. Speaker. But I think this is a fallacy, Mr. Speaker, because even very developed countries, even like the US, there is a federal law, Mr. Speaker, of capping rates. You cannot go beyond 5%, Mr. Speaker, from the federal rate in terms of lending to the end customer. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, I tend to believe, Mr. Speaker, that our commercial banks are only frustrating borrowers, and especially what the borrowers, the business people, to find a scapegoat. Mr. Speaker, I also think in our country we need much more other ways of financing our businesses. Because if you look at our loan books in our banks, most of the loans, Mr. Speaker, are just for ostentatious expenditures. People borrow to buy sofa sets. People borrow to buy big vehicles, Mr. Speaker. And I think even as we talk about the cost of borrowing, we need to segment so that the people who actually borrow money to drive our economy forward actually have less rate, Mr. Speaker, because they are doing what the cost is for our economy. Because borrowing, you may borrow, you may qualify, but what are we borrowing for? But also, Mr. Speaker, borrowing is not necessarily the only way of growing businesses. If you look at the countries I've quoted there, the major economies, Mr. Speaker, most businesses actually go to the bank as the last resort. You first exhaust avenues like private equity, Mr. Speaker, where you have a business, you can sell a part of it, Mr. Speaker, to the financier, who may exit at a later date by selling their stakes from that entity. Also, Mr. Speaker, avenues like venture capital, avenues like seed investments, Mr. Speaker, that will take a lot of demand, Mr. Speaker, from the current borrowers, Mr. Speaker, especially those who borrow for the sake of growing their businesses. Mr. Speaker, as I wind up, I also think in our country we have to be honest with ourselves that a financial sector is always very much interlinked with how the economy is doing. Mr. Speaker, the fact that we have so many defaulters in our country is a clear testimony that those people who are borrowing, Mr. Speaker, and as you know, Mr. Speaker, you can only allow a commercial institution to come and take your property if you are totally unable. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, it goes back to the point I'm driving home, that if you see our newspapers currently with so many auctioneers, Mr. Speaker, it is a clear testimony that because our financial sector is interlinked with the mainstream economy, Mr. Speaker, it shows there is a problem with our mainstream economy, Mr. Speaker, and the only manifestation of that fact can only be seen from the financial sector. With those points, Mr. Speaker, I support.
Your presentation finds a lot of resonance with the Speaker. And it is true that nowadays we have feds where banks are fetting auctioneers. The Honorable Murugara, you've been here, you had not spoken on this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. I've already spoken. I actually seconded.
Very well.
Now, I think we should be replying. And I was standing on number 95, so that possibly the debate.
So you are intervening, understanding order 95.
Number 95 that we do. I do reply.
Very well. Very well. Very well. Very well. You are within your rights. You are within your rights. Honorable members, allow me to. Oh yes, the Honorable Murugara, you have put me in trouble. Because you have spoken on this, you cannot take the floor on that, and it's not available to you. So remember, we will proceed. We shall proceed. We shall now have the Honorable who look for order. The member for Isiolo. No.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak to this amendment. It is actually a very significant amendment, although it relates only one section of the laws of contract. I'd like to thank Honorable Waititu for bringing up this amendment. Mr. Speaker, as Kenyans, we are a borrowing nation. All of us, at one time or another, do borrow from various lending institutions, commercial banks, cooperative societies, for various reasons, for personal development, for emergencies, and so on and so forth. And most of the times, it's a requirement by the lender for the borrower to have people guarantee their applications. And when we guarantee borrowers, we do it in good faith. But from time to time, various guarantors, Kenyans who have guaranteed application of their fellow Kenyans for loans, have been exposed to a lot of risk. And this amendment is meant actually to cushion guarantors from this risk. We have had situations where borrowers have had their assets being auctioned to recover bad loans by principal borrowers. We have had situations where cooperative shares of guarantors have been used to offset bad loans. And therefore, this amendment will actually put responsibility of pursuing the principal borrowers on the lender. And in most cases, actually, before even they approve the loans, the lenders have their own ways of confirming creditworthiness of the borrowers. And I'm sure if they were keen enough, most of the people who have borrowed money from these institutions have assets which can be auctions to recover the loans which have been defaulted. And therefore, this particular amendment is very timely. It will actually help so many Kenyans against risk of losing their properties and their assets as a result of guaranteeing their fellow Kenyans. And therefore, with those few remarks, I support the amendment.
The Honorable Anjira, Wangari, member for Gilgil. What is out of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have seen that most members have overwhelmingly supported this bill, and I rise under point Standing Order 95 to ask the mover to reply.
It's well within your rights, the Honorable Wangari. Allow me, members, then to put the question that the mover be called to reply. Will as many of that opinion say aye? Aye. Will as many of a corner opinion say nay? The ayes have it. The Honorable or your member for Muhoroni, there can never be anything out of order when the Speaker is on his feet. This is something that we should know is very basic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to reply, and first and foremost, I thank the honorable members of this House for the overwhelming support they have given to this bill regarding the proposed amendment. Mr. Speaker, sir, as I sat here, I have received communication from various areas in the country, from teachers, other civil servants who have taken loans, and they are saying that, in fact, this amendment is highly in consonance with what they have been expecting. So as a House today, we are enacting legislation that augurs very well with the population in the country. And this is very commendable. And with those remarks, I beg to reply.
Very well. Honorable members, the next necessary steps in regard to this motion will be undertaken when the matter will be listed again for consideration for reasons that are obvious. I will therefore direct that the time now being 12:59, that we call this matter to a close. Therefore, honorable members, the time being 1 p.m., this House stands adjourned till today, Wednesday, 26th June 2019 at 2:30 p.m.